Chapter 102. Practice makes perfection. Chakra is form and formless. Direct and indirect. As magic summons a flame, so too can it. As ki drives men to greater strength, so too does chakra. But it is so much more. Chakra is the mind and body as one. To master chakra, one must not simply combine ki and mana, they must master themselves. This is the basic mantra of 1,000 arms, 10,000 threads. If mind and body become one, then man has no equal. This art has two forms, the 1,000 arms, which focuses body over mind, and the 10,000 threads, which focuses mind over body. When both forms are trained to the pinnacle, one can be considered a true master. Searching through, I was able to briefly summarize the information about both forms. With 1,000 arms, you can maximize the ability to control objects remotely. A master of the 1,000 arms form can control 1,000 weapons as if he was holding them himself, and become a one-man army. As for 10,000 threads, it is more mystical. With this form, you spread your chakra to your surroundings in the form of thin threads, which you utilize for various abilities. You can use instantaneous movement through a thread, or with the proper practice materialize that thread into a weaker clone of yourself. A master of 10,000 threads can walk unhindered through any battlefield. When one reaches the realm of 1,000 arms, 10,000 threads, both forms evolve. The weaker clones become more powerful, and you can move between them with a simple thought. They become your eyes and your ears. You do not simply move your body with your thoughts, but you can turn your body into thought itself, stepping into the mind of another. Going through this, it was easy to classify the information. 1,000 arms was the offensive branch, while 10,000 threads was the defensive one. In order to become a true master, one must practice both, yet even just one was enough to qualify as its own art. That was why it was priced so expensively. Surprisingly, there was even a set of weapons within the information that were suggested for people practicing the art. For those pursing the 1,000 arms, there was a circular, bladed weapon that looked much like a chakram. As they required simpler motions to control with chakra as opposed to swords or daggers, they were a favored weapon. The favored weapon of 10,000 threads was a thin metal needle. Its length should be roughly 10 inches long, with as little width as possible. While a single such needle might seem to have little power on its own, this also means it is weakened less when cloned, and each clone will be able to utilize their own as powerful throwing weapons. To begin with, I decided to practice the 1,000 arms. Right now, I could only be considered to be at the most basic 2-arm rank, where all practitioners begin. I can wield 2 weapons at a distance of roughly 1 meter from my body. The 3-arm rank is where one truly begins walking this path, at which point they will be able to control 3 weapons, each within 3 meters of the body. At the highest rank, all 1,000 weapons will be able to be controlled within a kilometer. In order to practice, I began to focus, creating a very basic chakram on the floor in front of me. Once more of the world hits the metal age, I'll have Tubrok mass produce some of these for me to take down with me. Until then, I can just rely on whatever is available. With the chakram fully formed, I reached down and put my hand on it. In the admin room, I found that it was very easy for me to combine the energies, as long as I knew the right mixture. As such, I sent a steady flow of chakra from my hand into the weapon. Once my chakra filled the weapon, I stood up and took a single step back. Placing both hands behind my back, I focused purely on the thread of chakra connecting me to the chakram. Attempting to lift it felt as though I was flexing a muscle I had never used, and by the time it really had lifted up I could not be entirely sure whether I was doing so through my own power, or through the effects of the admin room. Still, I had the chakram floating unsteadily 1 step in front of me. In truth, training in the admin room could only go so far when training energies. Seeing as I had limitless energy to work with here, it was never a question of whether or not I had the power to do something, only whether I had the skill. Given enough time, I could probably train myself all the way to the 1,000-arm, 10,000 thread level in the admin room, but have made almost no progress when I actually descend, because my chakra won't be strong enough to do all of that. Still, this did let me practice the skill aspect, which I would further refine when I descend later. As such, I focused on the chakram, and began slowly moving it from side to side. I thinned the energy I was pouring into it as much as I possibly could, knowing that I wouldn't have such reserves available to me when I practiced this for real. The first problem arose when I thinned the energy too much, causing the connection to snap and the weapon to fall harmlessly to the floor. According to what I knew from the manual, I knew what was wrong. I had still been supplying enough energy, but my control was lacking. Thankfully, This was just a simple test to see whether or not I was good enough to be considered a 3-arm rank. And the answer was no. Instead, I moved on to the 10,000 threads, and began to do its training method. The best way to train these skills were together, after all. In order to fully master control of one weapon and be considered the 3-arm rank, it was suggested to wait until you had reached the 10-thread rank, with each following arm rank being another 10-thread ranks. To train this technique was actually fairly simple. Much like I created a connection to the chakram, I now had to create an empty connection from my finger. As such, I followed the training method and gathered my chakra to the tip of my finger. Gradually, I could see a blue dot of energy forming at the point where it gathered. Focusing on that point, I slowly pulled it upwards, creating a single thin line of blue energy. These were the threads that the form was named after, though they were typically meant to be invisible. I was probably only able to see them now because of where I was. Pointing that finger out, I watched as it slowly crawled its way through the air, before dipping down and pressing the tip against the ground on the opposite side of the room. This was far from usable in real combat at this speed, but the point was to make it faster, after all. With a slight step, I disappeared from my previous position, and immediately appeared where the thread had landed. This was the most basic technique of the 10,000 threads, the woven step. A practitioner could instantly transport themselves to any place that their chakra threads can reach. Back to training, I thought to myself, before once again creating that same thread. This time, I did not stop with one. Holding both my hands out, with my fingers pointing down, I focused to create multiple threads, one at a time from each finger. The first one formed fairly easily as it did earlier. The second offered some resistance, but still moved to hang right beside the first. When I formed the third thread, I noticed that the other two began to shake, slowly pulling back towards my fingers. I was getting harder to divide my focus, which was the main requirement for this technique to work. Giving up on the third thread for now, I went back to the other two, stretching them back out. When I sent them out, I did my best to keep my focus properly divided. The speed they moved at was even slower than the first time, but eventually they both connected to two different points of the room. Okay, so I can be considered at the 2-thread rank for now. I nodded to myself in satisfaction, glad that I wasn't the most basic and pitiful, threadless rank that was just starting like I was in the other form. Alright, my goal is 20 threads and 4 arms. Blank, underscore, blank, underscore underscore. Down in the world below, the festival of Dakar had come to an end in the city of Heldar. For most, it was a normal event like any other week. However, there was one man that was feeling different. A white-haired kitsune named Fenric. He gnashed his teeth in anger as he thought back to the man that had injured him, and stolen what should have been his. In the Dakar Shah, he had not simply been thrown back by that palm strike. It was something far more dangerous than that. He could still feel that man's energy in his body, blocking his access to his own ki. In truth, his injuries from the fight had been pretty light, since he had landed on a bundle of dried grass used to feed the Bajan. The true terror came when he tried to muster his strength to further soften his fall. When he attempted to summon his ki, he felt it fighting back against the residual energy from that palm strike. A sharp pain rose up in his chest, and he coughed up a mouthful of blood after he landed. After that, each time he tried to use his ki, he found himself hurting more and more. Without his ki, he had no hope of holding the title of Shirai, even with that damnable man refusing the title. He could not enjoy the luxuries that he had grown accustomed to, the authority his position brought with it. As soon as he lost a challenge, he would fall further than he had ever fallen before. I'll just have to fake it, he said with a silent nod, speaking to himself as there was nobody else present. No one knows, and nobody has to. As long as nobody challenges me, I'll be fine. He continued nodding to himself, as if that was his only path to salvation. However, as soon as the words had left his mouth, he felt a chill running down his spine. Is that all you are? A cold voice asked from behind him. A coward who was afraid to lose his power. He recognized the voice, how could he not? As he turned back to face the speaker, he saw a black-haired lichen. A woman he had been pursuing for months. Rin, what are you doing here? He asked, knowing from her words that she had heard his plan. He knew that he had to kill her to keep his secret safe, and immediately began thinking of ways he could do that, or intimidate her into keeping her mouth shut. Never had he even thought to ask himself how she managed to enter his home undetected, or how even know he could not smell her fragrance, or hear her stepping closer. If he could not see her standing in front of him, he would have no way to know that she was even here. Wait. In front of me. As soon as the thought crossed his mind, he looked sharply upwards. Originally, Rin had been at the far wall, where the moonlight would just barely illuminate her features. However, when he looked again, his nose was almost pressed against her own. She had covered the distance in a moment, with him never even seeing her move. Even without his key, that should not have been possible. At least, not by his understanding. You should have learned when to take no for an answer, she said, slowly raising her hand to place it against his chest. A hand he had dreamed about capturing for so long. And right now, he felt the power draining from his body as she touched him. And when to keep your nose out of another's business. Saying that, Rin turned and began walking away. Fenric watched, the light slowly slipping from his eyes as his knees grew weak. The moment she vanished into the shadows once again, he fell forward, slamming against the ground. In the morning, a physician came in to check on him, only to discover his dead body. There were no wounds, no marks of poisoning or disease. As such, it was declared that his injuries from the Daka Shah had acted up in the night, silently claiming his life. And nobody even suspected the black-haired girl who was happily dancing with her sister. Chapter 103. Brain versus Brawn. I'm not entirely sure how long it took me to train. I was determined to reach the goal that I had set for myself when I started. After all, it was no exaggeration to say that this was a matter of life and death for me. I had been looking for the chance to get a good trainer so that I could have proper lessons all this time, and I never even knew that I could simply buy the techniques I wanted. However, I was unlikely to do that unless it was absolutely needed. There might be an achievement for learning an art from an inhabitant. If I had to choose between paying a lot of points to get the knowledge now, or wait a while, and be paid points for learning it later. Of course I'll choose to wait. The training was difficult, to say the least. After I reached the 5 threads level, I had to leave the bedroom, instead making a wide empty area to train in. The confined space offered in the room was not enough for me to continue practicing at that point. In all honesty, controlling a single thread was incredibly easy. Even controlling 2 was not that hard. But, with each thread that you wanted to control, you had to split your focus an additional time. It might sound easy, but it is actually incredibly difficult to focus on so many things at once. Or at least, it should be. From what I understand, it should be almost impossible for anyone with what I would consider to be a normal human mind to be able to track 10,000 threads at once. Especially if they were also focusing on a fight. Which led me to think about something. The gods and goddesses split their minds on a regular basis, and in a far more complete degree than this. Maybe this martial art was created by keepers for keepers. After considering it, that was the only thing I could come up with. The 1,000 arms, 10,000 threads was not just a martial art to train chakra, but also a way to train a keeper to possess an ability closer to that of a companion. After I considered it from that angle, I was able to slow down and re-examine my training. By that point, I had managed to reach 10 threads, 3 arms. If I fully utilized both at the same time, it was the equivalent of focusing on 13 different things at once, already beyond the realm of normal. Knowing this, I continued my training, finding that simply being aware of the nature of the art actually helped me. I was able to place myself in the shoes of the gods and goddesses I interacted with, feeling how they would regularly divide their attention. Even little Orivy had to do that, so why couldn't I? Tara said that our minds were just different, but that's not necessarily true, right? In the admin room, it was similar to the underworld. Everything was a construct of focus and woven energies, including my own body. I could not be truly injured here. I did not need to eat or sleep, because I did not have a real physical form. If that is the case, then why would my brain be unable to process the things that it couldn't process before? That's where this art came in, a way to bridge that gap. The barriers that existed only within my mind were gradually broken through, one by one. Although it wasn't something as overwhelming as suddenly being able to dual wield perfectly because of parallel thoughts or anything like that, it remained that I was able to focus my mind on multiple things at once. Like this, I eventually reached my goal of 20 threads, 4 arms. Excited, I summoned my little communication paper and wrote a message to Calliope, asking her to meet me for a sparring match. I wasn't sure how long it would take, so I began preparing the weapons I would use for the spar. Because the 4 arms only meant having 2 remote-controlled weapons, I only created 2 chakrams, though I dulled the bladed edge. It's not like we could really hurt each other anyways. And for my own hands, I created 2 matching scimitars. These were the suggested held weapons for the Thousand Arms, as they went well with the general slashing theme that the art's attacks possessed. By the time I was done, I saw that Calliope had managed to wander into the territory I had created. She glanced around at the empty landscape, before looking back to me. "You sure you want to spar?" she asked curiously, stretching her muscular arms out to prepare. "I know that Tara said you got your hands on some new techniques, but..." I nodded my head to her question. "I don't really expect to win, since you've had more time to practice. I just want a chance to test out my abilities in an active environment, before I go down to the world to do so." She seemed to understand what I wanted with that, nodding in satisfaction. "All right, if you say so. Any special rules for this match?" As she asked that, she looked towards the two swords stabbed into the ground beside me, and the metal discs beside them. "These are part of the art I learned," I explained quickly. "We can use any of our powers we want, but no tampering with the admin room or anything like that. I only made these because I didn't feel like waiting to have Tubrok make me something for the spar." "Ah, all right," she nodded again. "Well, then we can start whenever you are ready." As she said that, she moved into a battle stance, one I recognized from the Ursa that had previously fought Fenric. I lifted my hands, causing the two swords to fly into them. I still was not properly trained in how to wield a sword, but there were some techniques listed in the manual I purchased. But first, I began spreading out the translucent blue threads along the surroundings. Due to the nature of this place, Calliope was able to see the chakra threads, and raised a curious eyebrow as she did so. However, she did not comment on it. Instead, she waited for me to make the first move. Seeing that she was waiting on me, I took a step forward. Using the woven steps, I appeared just a short distance away from her, off to the side. My arms were already in motion as I turned, bringing the swords across in a double horizontal slash. She appeared surprised by the sudden movement, but not so much that she was unable to react. Bringing her own arms up, she slapped the side of my lower blade, causing it to hit the upper one and throw me off balance. Yet, she did not follow through, instead taking a step back to avoid the pair of chakram that I had sent flying from their positions on the ground. When the metal rings missed their target, they floated in a circular motion around me. I wasn't sure if it was out of consideration or caution, but she gave me the time to regain my balance. "Interesting," I could hear her voice muttering quietly. With my next step, I appeared on both the left and right sides of her. This was the split thread method in the Thousand Threads. Only one of these images was real, while the other was a simple illusion, created from an after-image given form. This was not a true cloning, as that required one to reach the 100-thread level first, but it would do for a confusing tactic like this. Unable to tell at a glance which of us was real, Calliope bent her knees to squat down. Clapping her hands together powerfully, she then extended them to either side of her, accurately striking at both me and the illusion. This time, it was my turn to jump back in a hurry to dodge the attack, while the after-image dissipated like smoke. Originally, I had the chakram flying at her from the front again, but because of my hurried dodge, I briefly lost control of them. This caused them to fall to the ground just short of her position. Seeing that, she smiled, slowly standing up. "I gotta say, if I couldn't see these threads, I might not be able to fight you very well. Now that I know what they are, it's easier to handle." I could feel her energy rising as she spoke, so I decided to kick things up a notch as well. All 20 of my threads moved, touching at various points surrounding Calliope. This way, she wouldn't be able to tell which direction my next attack could come from. Or at least, that was the plan. I saw her closing her eyes, and determined that was the best moment to strike. Before taking that step, I had already begun slashing my swords across once again, so that I would still be in that motion when I arrived behind her. Yet, what met me was a powerful palm to the chest the instant I appeared. I could feel the ki in it as it propelled me back along the blank terrain. When I landed, I had to stab my swords into the ground to help bring me to a stop, and when I looked up I saw that her eyes were still closed. "You aren't the only one that knows how to use energy, Dale," she teased, her toned body turning towards me. "This is something that one of my people found, a way to make up for sneaky targets like you." He called it the blind man's eye. A ki field extends from my body, alerting me to any disturbance around it. When you moved behind me, I could already feel your presence. That's okay. I can't say it's cheating after what I've done. Still, pretty overpowered, though. I couldn't help but shake my head as I retorted. "Now, is there anything else you want to try?" She had a smile on her face as she asked that, once again assuming her battle stance. Just one. As I spoke, I slowly stood upright, my swords held at my sides, facing outwards. After this, it'll be over, whoever wins. She nodded to my statement, clearly preparing for an attack. Once more, I sent the threads out to surround her, and she furrowed her brow as she felt that. Her body tensed up, preparing to unleash another strike as soon as I appeared. So, I took that step forward, right into her approaching fist. And once again, I was sent tumbling back, this time unable to break myself so easily. Yet, I couldn't help but laughing when I finally came to a stop, and she sighed in frustration. So, a draw then? She asked in a voice filled with complaint. Although there was no doubt she could have killed me with that attack if we weren't in the admin room, there were still two swords pressed against her neck. The split thread requires two nearly simultaneous woven steps, the first one to create the after image, and the second for the real destination. Unlike most of the other abilities these arts teach, the split thread can only create one after image. After all, you only have 2 feet. When I stepped towards her this time, I had used the split thread again, and I am guessing that she could feel that brief difference in the timing, since she instantly struck my true body. But that was fine, because I had released my swords when I created the after image, causing them to appear behind her with it. Although she could have killed me with that punch, it's unquestionable that I could also have killed her with the swords at the same time. Really, that kind of self-sacrificing tactic isn't going to get you anywhere later, you know. She complained again, walking forward and extending a hand to help me up. If you die because of a stupid move like that, it's all over. True, but most people wouldn't be able to see those threads and force me to make that kind of move just to land a hit. I couldn't help but throw that back at her, smiling slightly. Okay. So you got me there. She chuckled, shaking her head. In terms of surprise, you can probably assassinate most people without them ever knowing where the hit came from. But if you give people time to adjust like you did me, and they aren't weaker than you, it will turn in their favor. I couldn't help but nod at that. True enough. Now I just need Tubrok to make the real weapons, and I can give this a proper test run. And I intended to do just that, too. There should be plenty of powerful monsters for me to practice against, and I might even gain a few levels in the process. Chapter 104. Hallowed be thy name. This time when I descended, I again appeared on an uninhabited continent, near where I had first practiced elemental ki. The area itself looked largely the same, although maybe a bit more overgrown. Thankfully, this was not the same continent that the Herrick appeared on, or else I would have had to choose somewhere else. I had descended in the body of a human, and at my waist was the bag of holding that contained my sword. Before I left, I asked Tubrok to begin working on the chakrams I would need, but it would have been unrealistic to expect them to already be complete. As such, I wasn't going to practice the 1,000 arms this time, instead focusing on the 10,000 threads. The target for this hunt was a plant monster averaging level 100, the Blinking Blossom. When I first saw it, it creeped me out to no end. However, I had to admit that this kind of opponent would be the perfect test for my new techniques. As I wandered through the forest, I made sure to block off all of my keeper stats, except for my health. No matter what, I could not afford to actually die here. But, cutting the other stats off did make it harder for me to detect monsters, so I had my sword at the ready. When I was here before, I had never journeyed far from the river, making all of this a new experience for me. I was hacking down thick bushes that got in my way, keeping my eyes focused on detecting any small movement. The Blinking Blossom was by no means the only monster in this forest, but it was the most powerful. As I was thinking that, a sharp screech came from above. Looking up, I saw a monkey with glistening silver skin jumping down at me, its clawed hands at the ready. Level 40 Silver Primate. Har har. Silver fur. Real funny. Whoever named that was just so creative. Sighing, I swung my sword up, feeling little resistance as it cut through the descending monkey. Although I can't say that I split it in half, it was definitely a deep enough cut to kill it, causing it to crash into the ground next to me. Once again, I had to admire the strength of the spellforged sword. Though the monkey was slightly lower level than me, it was still enough to be a difficult fight if I didn't have the weapon. As I thought about that, I heard something shift beside me. Turning my head abruptly, I saw a large red fruit. It seemed to be cracked open down the center, with a milky white arrow surrounding what looked like a pitch black bead. When I paused to stare at it, the red fruit quickly closed and reopened. It blinked. Jumping back, I was just in time to avoid a thick vine that had lashed out at me from beneath the blinking fruit. This was just one of the many eyes of the blinking blossom, but it was enough to let me know that I had found my target. Focusing on it, I appraised it to see whether this would be enough for a good test. Level 113 Blinking Blossom. Okay. Yup. Definitely strong enough. As I thought that, I hastily formed chakra along my skin and sent out the threads. Whether it was because of me rushing it, or because my brain was unable to handle it right now, I only ended up creating 12 threads instead of my maximum of 40. And, while I could not see them down here, I could feel them. While I was landing on the ground from dodging the first attack, another vine was sent lashing out at me. This one had another red-eye fruit along its end. I took a quick step to avoid the attack, appearing on the other side of it. Blinking blossoms can't be killed unless you destroy their main body, their mouth. It should also be the source of all of the vines. As such, I began running forward towards the direction where the vine came from. Gradually, I began to see more and more of the fruits, blinking at me from all directions. It did not take long before I was completely surrounded by the vines, but that was also what I wanted, since it meant I had found its center. When the vines rushed towards me, I flipped the sword in my hand and stabbed directly downwards, the blade stabbing into the smooth green ground. A horrid screech filled the air as green sap spread out from the cut. The vines faltered for a brief moment before striking more fiercely, but before they could land I had taken another step to disappear. I could feel my mana starting to run low, so my test was almost over. Although it did not take too much chakra to create and maintain the threads, I was still doing so with 12 at a time. Looking back at where I stabbed, the ground itself seemed to be shifting. Two giant leaf-like objects lifted themselves from the ground, coming together to form a giant green maw. From between its barbed lips, dozens of vines were pouring out, each one tipped with a blinking fruit. Finally, found the main body, I said with a sigh, flipping my sword back around to hold it properly. A blinking blossom would normally attack by dragging its victims into its mouth, before clamping shut like a Venus flytrap. At least, that's how the ones I witnessed behaved. Running forward, I charged directly towards the plant, spreading my chakra threads out around me. Whenever it launched its vines towards me, I would simply disappear from the trajectory, appearing a few meters off to the side. Like this, I was able to run all the way to the plant without getting hit. Imbuing the sword with ki, I gave a single slice up towards the base of its mouth, cutting deep and severing one of its lips. The green leaf, bigger than my body, fell to the ground as it let out yet another screech. This time, however, its scream seemed weaker. Green blood-like sap sprayed in my face as I turned full circle, letting the force of my previous swing carry me into the next, where I cut the second half of its mouth from the thick root anchoring it down. Monk has leveled up. Ninja has leveled up. Martial artist class unlocked. Martial art detected. Please declare the name of your art. Hero has leveled up. Hero has leveled up. Life arrow ability unlocked. I watched the flood of messages coming in, my body relaxing from the battle. As it did so, I felt a cold feeling wash over me. Although it was a bit late, but I felt fear over what just happened. I signed up for this, and knew logically that I was in no real danger, but still, this was the first fight that I had fought using purely my own abilities. And it was against a monster far higher level than myself. If not for my sword that could easily pierce its flesh, or my martial art that made it impossible to hit me with any attack I could see, this battle could have easily gone the other way. And, as I felt its blood washing down my body, I came to realize just how brutal these battles were. Yes, I had participated in the slaughter of the halflings during the Centaur War. But in that instance, I was a mere spectator, fighting from a distance. I had never approached them to kill them myself. As if annoyed that I was taking so long to answer them, the series of messages once again flashed in front of my face. Seeing the one about my martial art, I nodded. This was the level 1 ability of a martial artist, to declare your art. 1,000 arms, 10,000 threads. As I said that, I focused on all of the information that I had learned about the art. With this class, it took the information from the individual, and automatically turned them into abilities that could be learned for that person at higher levels. Martial School. 1,000 arms, 10,000 threads has been founded. Abilities stored for distribution. Ranged hand, silent executioner, hidden grapple, my domain, woven step, split thread, twin steps, mirrored heart, army of one. Ranged hand ability unlocked. Woven step ability unlocked. I couldn't help but nod again as I saw that. Though, looking back at the name of the new hero attack I received, I couldn't help but be curious. It couldn't really be overpowered as it sounded, right? Granted, I never tested that class's first ability. Curious to test this out before I went back, I turned towards a nearby tree and invoked the ability. Life arrow. I called out, feeling my arm raise up by itself. I could feel my body growing weak, but at the same time the air began to distort around my hand. A silver light formed in my palm, and I could feel myself exerting control over it, causing it to stretch and spin. I found myself pulling in elemental mana and wrapping it around the arrow, dyeing it a blood red before it fired. As the arrow traveled, it gave off a pulsating light, seeming to almost be alive. And when it hit the tree, it bore straight through, leaving a thin hole in its wake. However, it did not continue far beyond the tree, dissipating shortly after. Still feeling myself weakened by the attack, I opened my status window to see what was wrong. Name: Dale Mitchell. Race: Human Keeper. Health: 94 194, 128,730 128,830. Mana: 165 165, 41,042 41,040. Strength: 7 249. Ki: 196 196, 54,770 54,770. Stamina: 8 226. Intelligence: 10 184. Dexterity: 13 254. Wisdom: 13 296. Luck: 6 69. Charm: 5 67. Class list: Alchemist 1 38. Archer 0 93. Architect 0 78. Archmage 0 23. Armorer 0 49. Artisan 0 34. Assassin 0 53. Bard 0 73. Berserker 0 55. Blacksmith 0 82. Carpenter 1 79. Chef 0 60. Cleric 0 30. Druid 0 81. Enchanter 5 100. Engineer 0 5. Farmer 0 43. Gambler 0 6. Guard 0 63. Herbalist 2 50. Hero 3 3. Hunter 0 91. Jeweler 0 12. Knight 0 58. Leader 1 35. Leatherworker 0 64. Mage 2 87. Martial Artist 1 96. Merchant 0 34. Miner 0 68. Monk 8 99. Monster Tamer 2 64. Ninja 5 73. Noble 0 20. Painter 0 30. Pirate 0 13. Priest 1 54. Rogue 0 59. Scholar 1 34. Scout 0 51. Sculptor 0 32. Shaman 0 43. Spirit Hunter 15 42. Spirit Tamer 6 60. Swordsman 0 35. Tailor 0 26. Warrior 2 70. Weaponmaster 0 3. It used up over half my health for that one shot. No matter how powerful the ability looked at a glance, it was definitely not worth that kind of price. Shaking my head, I decided to disregard the hero class, for now at least. Since my test down here was done, I moved to call up the menu and ascend again, when I noticed something glistening within the corpse of the blinking blossom. Taking a closer inspection, I found a small green bead, no more than an inch thick, embedded in the corpse. This was not something I had seen before, and I was rather interested in asking Tara what it was. Digging it out, I then resumed the process of ascending to the admin room. Setting the bead on the desk, I set the computer to fast forward for another 100 years, moving to go and find Tara. Blank, underscore, blank, underscore underscore. Another year passed, and the city of Cowabunga once again fell silent. The residents hurriedly closed themselves in their homes, hiding from the turtle tide. By now, nearly none even remembered of the events that had occurred a year prior, when a wandering stranger had assisted their mad enchanter. Once more, Karihan and Thal sat upon the walls, watching out to keep track of the tide. They could see the shadows forming beneath the still waves. Hundreds of them moving like a swarm of insects as they came nearer. This year, it was Thal's turn to watch the interior of the city, facing the ocean while Karihan watched the plains to warn any who might approach. And what he saw left him speechless. For a brief moment, the walls of the city began to shine. What has that mad witch goddess involved in this time? As he cursed in his mind, he noticed something was wrong with the turtle tide. Although the first few of them had reached the shore, they merely looked around briefly before entering the water and swimming back. Could she have actually done it? He began to think with excitement, though he dared not take his eyes off the wall. The ward truly had done its job, with Rinnan keeping it active from the comfort of her home. As long as the mana gathered in the last year remained active, the turtles were unable to approach the city. Or rather, they had no reason to, because everything within the city's walls simply did not exist. There was no food for them to scavenge within their senses, so they sought it elsewhere, in a target they normally did not approach due to the danger. However, hunger can make a beast do things they normally would not. Beneath the water, just off the coast, the hundreds of turtles were swimming in unison towards the Shallows King, a fish with scales harder than steel, a body bigger and stronger than anything the elves had seen before. Over 20 meters long, it saw the insignificant turtles approaching it, and opened its gaping maw. Immediately, a suction force began pulling in some of the turtles, devouring them whole while the rest charged at the giant fish. They rammed against it, trying to break its scales with their key-enhanced beaks. Yet, there was nothing that they could do, its scales were impervious to their attacks. With a single swipe of its tail, a wave arose above the water, throwing several turtles into the air. Some shells shattered from the impact when they collided directly with the attack, but most were pushed away by the water's current, only to charge back in. This was a stop in their migratory patterns where they were always left incredibly hungry upon arrival, and now there was only one food source available to them. It was a choice between fighting for their lives, or dying. From the surface, Thal could see the still waters suddenly appear to explode, wave after wave crashing along the coast. The Shallows King had been angered like never before, and Thal could barely make out the figures of shattered turtles being flung from the waters. But it was when the waters went still that the surprise truly struck him. The waters had gone red, the blood of the giant beast flowing out from every corner of its body. Its scales had yet to be broken, but the turtles it devoured were still whole. While its scales were harder than steel, its organs were still weak enough for the hungry monsters to devour. And devour they did, eating through the soft tissue until the creature met its end. This was the year when the turtle tide became the tide of blood. Blank, underscore, blank, underscore, underscore. Walking through the halls, I had just made it to Udona's room, where Tara could often be found socializing, when a voice filled my mind. At first I thought it might be Tara herself, asking me not to disturb her for some reason. But then, I registered what was actually being said. Holy Father, I do not know if you can hear me, I do not even know if you are out there. I have prayed time and again, but received no answer. But once again, I offer you my prayer. A gentle, unknown female voice entered my ear. From the sounds of it, it seemed to be that of a child, a teenager at best. I do not know why you remain hidden to the world, or why you have given me this power. Mother won't tell me the truth, and everybody else assumes that my blood is that of Ryone's. Chapter 105. The Demigod's Tale. From a young age, Leowyn always knew that she was different. Not just because of how everyone else treated her, but because of something much more concrete. The world itself told her she was special, that her blood was not that of a mortal. Titles. Demigod's might. Born with the blood of creation flowing through your veins, you carry the lineage of a power older than history. Your connection to this particular deity has granted you strength unmatched by any of your peers. Double strength gain from all classes. It was impossible for her to tell when she first saw that she had that title, as it had been with her from before she could remember. According to her mother, she was born with it. And because of that title, people had distanced themselves from her. Not out of fear, but reverence. She is the daughter of the goddess Ryone. The goddess's child walks among us. Many such comments could be heard as she was a child, people bowing respectfully to her as she passed. The Church of the Golden Goddess had even visited on her 50th birthday, asking her mother for permission to raise the child as a holy figure. Anyone could tell that they wanted nothing more than to use her for their own purpose, though, so her mother outright refused them. When the church threatened to take the child through force, Leowyn's mother reminded them of her name. Rinnan, the mad enchanter, the woman whose magic knows no equal among the elves. She drove the priests away with her magic, letting them know that anyone who tried to steal away her daughter would find out what a true wrath was like. While she might be cold in front of others, she was the only one who truly embraced Leowyn. While she was growing up, she never wanted for anything, except for friends. Yes, her mother showered her with all of the love she could handle, but everyone her own age was afraid to approach her. The child of the goddess, how could a mere mortal elf be worthy of associating with her? When some tried, their parents harshly pulled them back, apologizing profusely for any offense their children may have caused. But there was one thing that nobody seemed to understand. Nobody but Leowyn herself. her blood and might did not come from Ryon, as people seemed to assume. In the depths of her heart, there lurked another nameless existence. One she felt had been there forever yet she had never seen. Her connection to this fellow seemed every bit as strong as her innate bond with Ryon, so she knew that there must be a reason. When she questioned her mother about who her father was, her mother seemed to become nervous at first, saying that he was just a traveling scholar. But Leowin knew that couldn't be the case. Yes, there was someone who had visited her mother a decade before her birth, but she knew there was more to the story. Leowin consulted every bard and historian she could find, using the pretext of testing them in Ryon's name, as a means to question them. She felt bad doing this, but it was not without its merit. She learned of a legend from generations past. A voice that spoke to all creation, telling of the world changing. At first it brought with it fear as men became bound to even the most absurd remarks, but then it came again. According to what she heard, this was the birth of the questing scrolls, an object that anyone could create, even without materials. With this discovery, Leowin was certain. Her blood's power was not from Ryon, but from this nameless god. The one who stood above all others, yet remained hidden from everyone. After she became determined that this was the case, she became devoted to understanding anything she could about her father, her real father. Every night, starting from her 70th birthday, she prayed without an answer. For 20 years, she did not skip a single night, knowing that he would answer her one day. He had given her life, he would not truly abandon her. As the title promised, her body had quickly become stronger than anyone else with the same levels as her, to the point where it had become hard for her to move properly when she was younger. In order to counter this, it was her mother that helped her train, making her practice classes that would raise her stamina and dexterity so that her body was able to move naturally. Without her mother's guidance in this matter, Leowin knew that her body would not have developed as well as it was today. And now, after 20 years, an answer finally came to her after praying one night, on her 90th birthday. Her faith had been rewarded, and her thoughts had been verified in the truest sense. Blank, underscore, blank, underscore underscore. Okay, what? I asked myself, no longer bothering to just go look for Terra the hard way. Something far more urgent had happened if I was suddenly getting a prayer. Terra. I focused inwardly, trying to contact the felon goddess. We need to talk, now. Alright, what's going on? She asked, suddenly appearing behind me. When I turned around to face her, her relaxed expression suddenly became more serious. What is it? Why did I just get a prayer? I'm not even a real god. I told her about the prayer I had just received, which had no doubt come from the child of Rinnan and myself. I knew that would have something to do with it, but still. I'm not a god in the system, so there should be no way for me to actually have someone pray to me, at least not successfully. Terra's eyes opened briefly in surprise, before a small smile surfaced on her lips. Oh, it happened. Well, this is interesting. I was about to get onto her to tell me when she began explaining. Don't worry, I'll talk. I told you that it was fairly rare for a coupling of the divine and mortal to produce a legitimate demigod. But, when it happens, naturally the child of a god will have a connection with their holy parent. This is the same kind of connection that the races naturally have with their patron deity. So, it's no real surprise that she can pray to you. Okay. But what do I do? I mean, I can't even reliably use the mental communication in the admin room, let alone knowing how to answer a prayer. I spoke out, somewhat nervous. I felt like I had just been thrust quite rapidly into fatherhood. Yes, I knew that Rinnan was pregnant, and that I'd be a dad eventually. But at the time, I really felt more like a sperm donor than a prospective parent. I had expected to not even hear about the child until Ryon told me about her later. You're really wanting to do this, huh? Terra asked in surprise, carefully examining my features. Well, I don't plan to stop you, of course. It's kinda nice seeing you taking this seriously. So, how do I answer a prayer? I asked more directly, looking straight at her. If I was going to do this, I'd do it right, at least, right. Blank, underscore, blank, underscore underscore. My child. The voice rang softly in Leowin's ears, long after she had fallen asleep after her nightly prayer. However, the voice was enough to cause her to jolt awake, the furred blanket falling from her bed. Did she really just hear that, or was it a dream? Holy Father. She cupped her hands together and closed her eyes, trying to catch that echo of a voice that had reached out to her. Is that you? It's me, Leowin. It was a gentle voice, the same loving tone that her mother had always spoken to her with when she was upset. But this time, she could hear it from a man's voice. Soft, barely above a whisper, yet at the same time reaching deep inside of her. She knew this was real. This was her father. Father. She responded with a small smile, feeling tears forming at the edges of her eyes. How long had she waited to hear this voice? How many times had she forced herself to remember that he had to exist, that the feeling she had since being born was real? Don't cry, my daughter. She could almost feel herself being wrapped up in a warm presence as the voice came to her again. I am sorry for neglecting you for so long. She shook her head rapidly, letting her tears fall. They were not out of sadness, but joy. She had yet to become an adult by elven standards, but this was still the happiest she had ever been. No, don't apologize to me. I'm just glad to hear your voice. I have so many questions I want to ask you. Can you answer them for me? Of course, anything that I can tell you. Now that the two of them were talking, it seemed so easy for her to communicate with him, as if his voice had always been there, just waiting for her. She did not even consider asking where he had been her whole life, because that question just seemed so small, so unimportant. Who are you? Although hesitantly, she mustered up the courage to ask what she felt to be the most important question. It took a while for a response to come through, long enough that Leowin began to believe she may have offended him. However, just before she was about to withdraw her question, the answer came. I have many names and titles. I ask you not to mention me to others if you can help it, because they would not understand. There was some hesitation in his tone, yet she couldn't help but agree with him. Everyone had long since known of Ryon, even a child knew of her. Yet him, aside from some historians, very few knew that there once existed a voice that surpassed that of Ryon's. I understand, father. Then, can I ask why you gave me this power? This time, his answer came much more quickly. That power is yours and yours alone. You are my one and only daughter in all the world. I did not expect that it would cause you such trouble, though. No, it's fine, father, she hurriedly retorted in her mind, almost opening her mouth to speak verbally. She was worried that she had disappointed him, that she wasn't putting her gift to proper usage. I will cherish it always. The father and daughter spoke in this way for a while longer, Leowin telling of her life so far, happy to finally have a father that she could talk to. As for that mysterious, unnamed god, he seemed all too happy to talk to his daughter as well. Their conversation lasted well into the night, until Leowin could feel sleep starting to overtake her once again. Before she fell asleep though, she asked one final question. Father, will I be able to talk to you again? She had waited 20 years to hear his voice. Now that she knew he was real, she didn't want to lose him. She knew it would be asking too much to be able to speak with a god as powerful as he on a regular basis, but still she had to ask. I cannot do this every night, Leowin. He answered, and although his tone was slightly playful, it sent a feeling of sadness through her. There is much for me to do. However, once every year, on the anniversary of your birth, pray to me and I will be here. You need not pray every night as you have in the past, but if you call out to me on that one night, I will answer. Although she had been saddened by the knowledge that she would not be able to talk to him like this all the time, this last piece of information made her smile happily. What was 1 year to an elf like her? She had already waited faithfully for 20 without ever hearing his voice. If she could speak to him once every year, she would happily accept it. Yes, father. Thank you. As she closed her eyes to sleep, she heard a soft melody singing in her ears. The words were unknown to her, something she had never heard before, yet it was so soft and sweet. Her smile grew as her father sang her to sleep, letting her once more return to her dreams. Chapter 106. Core Studies. I felt a soft smile on my face as I watched Leowin go to sleep. In the Elven language, her name roughly translates to little star, so naturally I wanted to sing a particular song for her to sleep to. Of course, that song didn't exist for the elves, and I wasn't sure whether or not she'd like her name being so obviously used in a song, so I kept the language English. So now what? Tara asked with a smile, having formed a chair to sit beside me as I talked to Leowin through the computer. Are you planning to just follow along with her life for the next few centuries? I couldn't help but shake my head. No. While that does sound nice, I can't just stop developing the world for several hundred years. I'll keep my fast forwards to 1-year intervals at the most, so that I can keep my appointments with her, but otherwise I still have work to do. That was the reason I had told her to contact me once a year, because there was no realistic way that I'd be able to speak with her all the time. My training in the 10,000 threads has not nearly reached the level where I would be able to devote a part of my thoughts to a world moving thousands of times the normal speed. Tara nodded her head with approval, though a slightly sad look could briefly be seen. Okay. Just remember, she is still mortal. I nodded at that comment, and she let out a sigh. Anyways, what was it that you were coming to me for before you got her prayer? I'm assuming that you weren't just standing outside of Udona's room expecting her to give you a late night romp. I chuckled slightly, smiling towards her. No, I was hoping to find you there, to ask you about this. As I said that, I reached out to grab the small green ball that I had left on the desk. This was lodged inside the corpse of a blinking blossom. Do you know what it is? Naturally, I had done the basic task of focusing on it to identify it, but all it identified as was, Blinking Blossom Monster Core 100%. Given that I had never seen a monster core before, I had no way of knowing what they were for, or what that percentage even meant. Ah, you found one, huh? She asked with a smile, looking down at the orb. It'd probably be best to talk with Irena about this. She's the one who governs death, and these things come off of dead monsters. She'll probably know the most about them. Tara answered with a mischievous smile. In other words, you know, but you want me to go talk to the others, and not rely on you to answer questions that they are able to answer as well. I repeated bluntly, and her smile widened further. Fine, fine. Any idea where she's at right now? Tara closed her eyes for a moment before answering. Right now, she's with Orivy in the living room. It looks like they are watching anime together. Orivy talked her into it with the excuse of research for her realm. And that mischievous grin was right back on her face. I guess I'm going to be interrupting then, I said with a shrug, standing up and grabbing the core. Tara nodded her head, vanishing into thin air without a word, no doubt returning to whatever it was she was doing before I called for her. The trip to the living room was short, and I soon found the two goddesses sitting on the couch, leaning against each other. Naturally, their research was focused on anime that heavily included elements of afterlife. Though how that equated to swordsmen was beyond me. Irena, can I steal you away for a moment? When I spoke up, the two goddesses jumped slightly in their seat, turning to look at me. On Orivy's face, there was a wide smile as she lifted an arm to wave at me. Hey big bro, what's up? Irena's face also showed a brief glimpse of excitement, before being replaced by her usual stoic mask. I need to borrow Irena for a moment to ask her a couple questions. You don't mind, right Rivy? Not at all. Orivy shook her head heavily, before smiling to Irena. You go ahead, I'll pause it here. We can finish watching it once you're done, Kay. Irena smiled softly to Orivy, nodding to her before standing up to face me. What is it you wanted, Dale? She asked with a calm voice, though I could catch her lips twitching as she suppressed a smile. I wanted to ask you about these. I explained, lifting up the monster core for her to see. She did not seem at all surprised to see it, as she simply stared at it for a moment before turning to face me again. This is a monster core. I'm assuming you know the difference between an animal and a monster, correct? She asked, raising a curious eyebrow at me, as if that was a key point in the explanation. Right. A monster is able to use some kind of energy, like ki or mana, and an animal can't. Are you saying that the core is the reason why? Yes and no. She shook her head, holding her hand out for the core. Once she had it, she continued her explanation. Not all monsters have cores like this. For those that possess ki, their hearts naturally generate it, as it would with a human, elf, or so on. But for those that use mana, the story is different. Like spiritual energy is in my realm, mana is a manifestation of thought. How could such simple monsters be able to cast powerful magic without the ability to understand the magic? Seeing that I wasn't able to answer her, she rolled the core around in her palm. It is these cores. A monster's core is the manifestation of their magical ability. If I'm not mistaken, this came from a blinking blossom. They possess a magic that lets them extend their limbs to great length in order to trap prey. Like any monster that possesses such an ability, its magic is sealed within this core. Though, it is far more difficult for any creature other than the blinking blossom to use its effect. Okay. I think I get that. Then, what about the percentage? When I appraised it, it registered as having 100%. Hearing my question, she nodded. Mana can't just come from nowhere. And it can't be produced endlessly by an unintelligent creature. During its growth period, until it hits adulthood, the monster core absorbs mana slowly by feeding off of the monster's ability to learn during that time. However, after it hits adulthood, that learning process slows, and it may even spend mana faster than it recovers it. This is only solved by hunting. If a monster with a core devours another monster's core, they can digest the mana within it to add to their own. If this one is completely full, then it no doubt had a meal shortly before you found it. However, once the monster core is depleted, it crumbles into nothing. Okay, this is definitely new information. And something that Ryan should probably know, if she hasn't figured it out already. After all, she only recently posed the question to me of why monsters were able to use magic. The goddess of magic knows about this, right? Just to be safe, I figured I had to ask. Irena let out a small chuckle as she heard that, nodding her head. She learned of it right after your previous fast-forward session began, I believe. Most monster cores are left undiscovered because they lurk in the brain of the monster, and can be destroyed if not carefully removed. However, I recall there was a large monster near one of her cities that was killed recently. Its core was thankfully not eaten, so her elves were able to retrieve it. I wonder how those would work as a ward power source. Then, I couldn't help but let that thought float around in my head. I see. That's actually a lot more information than I was expecting to get out of this. And it was pretty useful, too. Irena couldn't restrain her smile as I commended her on that. I'm glad that I was able to help. Is there anything else, or do you have to get back to your business? She asked, holding the core back out for me to take. I don't think that there's anything I urgently need to do right now. I thought about it in my head. With me pausing to speak to Leo in every year, I would have a lot of time in my future to relax. Hell, with how long elves lived, it might go all the way until the next keeper meeting. Well then, would you mind joining us? She asked, an almost hopeful tone in her voice. I assure you, it is quite a good documentary to watch. It's called anime, but sure. I shrugged my shoulders, moving back with her to sit between Irena and Orivy. The halfling goddess was only too happy to be able to lean against me as she started the show up again, but Irena soon did the same. Though, her wings spread out to wrap around both mine and Orivy's backs. Blank, underscore, blank, underscore underscore. The next morning, Leowyn awoke with a bright smile on her face. Remembering her father's instructions from the night before, she did not offer her normal morning prayer, and rather got started on her day as soon as she awoke. Her mother seemed surprised to find her moving around so early. However, when Leowyn began humming a soft melody to herself over breakfast, Rinnan naturally couldn't keep her curiosity in check. Are you looking to become a bard all of a sudden? She teased playfully, leaning over and poking her young daughter on the shoulder. Mom. It's not like that, she defended herself, shaking her head. I just thought it sounded nice, is all. She wanted to tell her mother that she had learned the truth about her father. However, he had asked her not to share the knowledge of him. If even her mother didn't know who he was, then he definitely had a reason to keep that secret from her. Leowyn had no plans to expose her father's secrets, not after she had finally met him. The idea of upsetting him, and not being able to contact him anymore made her feel small and afraid. In all her years until now, she had never had a father figure to look up to, and her only real friend had been her mother. Someone seems pretty happy. Did you like my present that much? Rinnan couldn't help but ask with a smile. As yesterday had been Leowyn's 80th birthday, she had prepared a special dress to give her daughter. It had taken her a while to prepare, but it was worth it if Leowyn liked it. It's really pretty, Mom. She nodded her head happily as she thought about the black dress in her room, star-like patterns woven into it. Not only did the dress look nice, but since it had come from the Mad Enchanter, it naturally had additional functions as well. So, what are we working on today? How's your monk training coming along? Rinnan asked cautiously, looking over to her daughter. Her daughter was a real beauty, even by elven standards. Her silver hair reached down to the small of her back, and her thin, toned frame gave her an air of strength and majesty. She had been trained since she was young to have a healthy body, and it showed. I'm at 37 right now. Leowyn answered casually. This was a normal routine for them, planning out what levels she needed in order to maintain the balance of strength and flexibility in her body. Alright, that's good, Rinnan said with a small sigh. If you want, you can go out hunting today then. There shouldn't be any problems with your body. Hearing that she was able to leave the city, Leowyn's smile grew even wider. Because of her title, she was not allowed to go anywhere dangerous unless the balance in her body was kept at a reasonable level. And although she could find no friends among the elves, being a hunter meant that she was able to commune with animals, to a degree. Thanks, Mom, she called out, suddenly reaching over and hugging her mother. Chapter 107. Of Love and Loss. After I had spent a few hours watching TV with Orivy and Irena, the halfling goddess decided she wanted to go take a nap. As for Irena, she seemed almost reluctant to part, but also wanted to check on the status of the afterlife. Which left me, going back to my own room and returning to the computer. I began the process of fast-forwarding the world just a little bit at a time, setting each one to stop when Leowyn prayed to me. This way, I'd always be able to respond to her annual prayers. And, honestly, I have to say that it went better than I expected. I had thought that I would get bored talking to her back to back like that, each conversation lasting well into the night. Her night, anyways. Yet, it always seemed to feel fresh. With each new conversation, she had new experiences to tell me about, new questions to ask. Every year, she seemed to get more and more bold, less afraid that every question would displease me. After our ninth scheduled conversation, she even made a rather important request. Well, it was one that I could tell was important to her. Holy Father, next year, can I see you? I like talking to you, but I'd like to be able to see you once. I had to think for a moment on how to answer that. It's true that she had never seen her own father before, so of course she would want to. As for why now, all of a sudden, I could figure it out pretty easily. Leowyn was currently 99 years old. Turning 100 for an elf marks their entry into adulthood, a very special anniversary for her. Okay, I spoke out, talking into the program that Tara had set up for me on the computer. It was so much easier to communicate this way, without worrying about frying her brain from thinking too hard. But I'll have to teach you a special trick in order to see me. So for the next year, I need you to practice it, and make sure that you can perform it when the time comes. Oh, of course, Father. Anything you want, just tell me. Her voice seemed excited by the thought of seeing me in person, even if she did have to jump through a few hoops to achieve it. So, I decided to teach her. It might be inconvenient for me to appear in that city so soon after I was there to set up the wards. Soon being relative, of course, since the elves lived so long. And I didn't particularly want to go about creating an entirely new persona for this, since I intended to appear as special to her. Blank, underscore, blank, underscore, underscore. Is he really going to come? Leowyn thought nervously as she snuck out of the city, long after the sun had fallen. The regular patrol had just finished, so she knew the area that she was going to would be safe. Though, even if it hadn't, there were few creatures that could threaten her in these plains. Thus, Leowyn walked, her destination the statue of Ryon just a short distance outside the city. Her father had told her that she would be able to see him if she went to him tonight. She wasn't sure how to feel about this. Should she be happy that she gets to meet her father? Or should she be nervous about meeting a god face to face, one who legends speak of as more powerful than Ryon herself? Leowyn took deep breaths to force herself to calm down, soon arriving behind the statue as she was told. She was wearing the black dress that her mother had made for her on her 80th birthday. Although it was now 20 years old, it held a special significance for Leowyn, as that was also the same night that she had first spoken with her father. I'm here. She closed her eyes in prayer, at the same time circulating her mana into her eyes. When she opened her eyes, she saw a flash of light before her. Before that light gathered together in the shape of a man. For all intents and purposes, he seemed normal. A slender body, thin features. With his body lacking in color, it seemed to cause his hair to turn the same shade of silver as her own, which brought a small smile to Leowyn's lips. Father, she spoke quietly, as if she had difficulty believing her own eyes. He had told her that this ability would let her see the spirits that roamed the land, and she had seen that herself a few times, though mostly with wild animals. This was her first time seeing the body of an elf through this form of sight. Hello, Leowyn. He answered her with a soft smile. I hope I didn't keep you waiting too long. Was he talking about since she called to him, or all the years she had spent wanting to know about him? Either way, she felt her eyes moisten, and not from the strain it took to see him. Shaking her head, she had a happy smile on her face. No, not at all, thank you for coming. I was afraid you'd be too busy. Of course not. My child. The elf before her answered her. I told you that I would be here for you. Or do you not trust me after all this time? She almost froze up at his words, until she identified the teasing tone behind them, and realized he was joking. He did that to her sometimes, seeming to enjoy teasing her to get her to relax during their talks. Though honestly, it gave her a fright every time. No, not that at all, father. I just never really thought I'd be able to see you, in person, I mean. I had always hoped that I could, but hope was all it had ever been. She shook her head sadly. Her social life had not improved much in the years since she had begun talking to him, though she had already told him all about that. If not for her mother's health starting to decline, she likely would have left to find a new home where nobody knew about her. Thinking of that, she looked at the man before her with a hopeful gaze. Could you do something to help my mother? She's been sick a lot lately. Age has taken its hold on her, and I fear she will only get worse over time. Of course, her mother easily had another century left in her, but beyond that, a mortal body could only last for so long. Her father seemed surprised by this request, but regretfully shook his head. There's nothing that I can do to reverse aging, Leowin. No matter what I attempt, she can only live a single life. But why? Leowin felt herself growing confused and emotional. Normally, she would never question him to this degree, but this was for her mother's sake. You can change the rules of the world with a thought. Why do people have to die at all? Wouldn't it be fine if everyone could stay together forever? After she asked that, she realized what she had done, and hurriedly brought her hands to her mouth, wanting to apologize. However, her father only shook his head. The world is only so big, Leowin, it is hard to explain, but I'll try. There are two reasons why death must exist. Leowin slowly lowered her hands from her mouth as she listened, making sure to memorize every word he spoke. The first, and most simple, is limited resources. If people cannot die, but children are still born, then they will have to expand to acquire food and water. But what happens when there is no more land to expand to? If they go across the seas, they may find more, but the world is not infinite. The earth is not as boundless as the night sky. She could almost understand what he was saying. At the very least, she could tell that he believed it. But it was the next thing he said which really got her thinking. The second, and most important reason why death has to exist, is to give life meaning. A man who lives for one lifetime will always strive to do more in his limited time, while a man who lives for eternity will simply prolong doing anything he doesn't need to. He will still be alive, but will he really be living? She wanted to ask what the difference was, but stopped herself. He was more than just her father, he was the God that watched over all. His words would not be meaningless, it was just her that failed to completely understand it. She would take time to consider what he said, so that she could find the meanings that were currently hidden to her. Okay, father. But, is there anything that you can do for her? Please, she doesn't have to live forever, but I don't want her to be in pain. That just seems too cruel. Again, her father shook his head, causing her heart to ache. Though, his words did not match the solemnness she was feeling. I doubt she is hurting as much as you fear. In time, she will feel the ravages of old age, but right now she is still quite young, wouldn't you say? And honestly, if there is something your mother wants, do you think that there is anything she wouldn't be able to get herself? She couldn't help but widen her eyes at what sounded like his praise for Rinnan. Yet, the more she thought about it, she realized that he was right. Although her mother was known as the Mad Enchanter, she was incredible in her own right. Aside from the church, who refused to deal with her ever since she refused to hand Leowin to them, she was able to speak with anyone she wanted, even the queen herself. As for her own power, Leowin had seen time and again that her mother was an expert when it came to magic. All right, I'll listen to you for now. But, if the situation gets bad, can I ask you for help later? She pleaded one last time. She knew just from looking at him, just from what she had learned and the way that he talked, the lifespan of a single elf was just a short moment for him. The fact that he had given her so much of his attention was already nothing short of miraculous. His smile grew warm at her words, and he nodded his head. Of course, if anything serious happens, either to you or her, you need only call for me. I can't say that I will definitely be able to keep her alive no matter what, but at the very least, I can ease her pain or save her from a crisis. Her eyes once again grew moist at his words, and she nodded her head. Thank you, father. Saying that, she sat down at the base of the statue, looking up at him as he moved to join her. Can we still talk like this? Like we normally do? He nodded at her request, and her smile grew even further. Even after all this time, she was still afraid that her words might have upset him. But, seeing him agree, she began telling him about what she had experienced in the past year. About everything she had learned and done, and even about her animal friends that she had made in the nearby hills. However, this night did not end like those others they had shared. Her mana eventually wore out, leaving her unable to see or hear him. In a panic, she had thought he left, before he spoke into her mind that he was still there. Gently, he told her to go back home and rest, and that he would stay with her until she had fallen asleep. Every year before, she had fallen asleep listening to that same sweet melody which reminded her of the stars in the sky. But not tonight. Tonight, he told her a story. A story of people she had never heard of before. Lovers of opposing families who wanted nothing more than to be together. She listened to him tell of the treachery they faced from their own households, and while she was surprised that he did not sing to her, she was still happy to hear this story. Blank, underscore, blank, underscore, underscore. I had been reading the original Romeo and Juliet, courtesy of Tara, to Leowyn when I noticed that she had fallen asleep. I considered singing to her like I had in the past, but felt like that wasn't really suitable anymore. Although almost no time had passed for me, she was an adult now. Rather than singing her to sleep, I thought it more fitting to tell her tales of love and adventure. Thus, for our following conversations, I had Tara prepare a pile of classic books and plays for me to read to her. Whether Tom Sawyer, Treasure Island, even a few I myself had never read, I would read them to her after every conversation. Every now and then, she would ask me questions about the stories, like what certain things meant or how they worked, but for the most part she enjoyed listening to stories that couldn't be found anywhere else in the world. Of course, every now and then, I took a break from simply fast-forwarding after one conversation to begin the next, so that I could practice my 10,000 threads or check on the status of the other races. And this is how I came across another love story that I shared with Leowyn in the most unlikely of places. Blank, underscore, blank, underscore, underscore. Aki and Seppo lived high in the mountains, separated from the rest of the world. Leowyn closed her eyes as she listened to her father's voice again, once more experiencing the stories that often seemed impossible. Although they were isolated, they had never once felt alone, for they always had each other. From a young age, they had been friends, fighting battles and sharing joy together. When the two of them grew up, it was only natural that they developed feelings for each other. Aki, as a famous martial artist, and Seppo, a revered shrine maiden. The two seemed to live completely different lives on the surface, yet they were never far apart. When Seppo was destined to wed another, the two of them abandoned their families and fled together without a second thought. But, how could they simply leave their families like that? Leowyn knit her brows together as she asked that. Couldn't they have resolved it differently? Maybe. But, their families were not the type that liked to compromise. Almost like Romeo and Juliet's. Anyways, the two of them ran far, far away, setting up a life together where none could find them. Seppo always felt that she had done wrong, abandoning her temple and her family, but she never truly regretted it. Her leaving meant being able to share a life with her love. As for Aki, he had little family to speak of, so his decision had been far easier. With their new life, they set up a small shrine atop the mountain, where Seppo continued her daily service. Aki became a farmer, tilling the land at the base of the mountain, climbing it day and night. Even though there were no guests to visit her shrine, it was enough for Seppo. With her shrine, she was able to feel connected with the world, as if that was truly her place. Especially whenever she saw her beloved Aki waiting for her. Yet, like with all stories, things were unable to proceed smoothly for Aki and Seppo. As Leowyn heard that, she felt her heart tense up. One long winter season, a blizzard ravaged the mountain on which they lived. Aki was trapped at the bottom, while Seppo felt the worst of it at the top. Although Aki put all his might into scaling the snow-covered peak, the weather had slowed him down far too much. In his absence, his beloved Seppo had fallen gravely ill. The storm was still raging, so he could not carry her down to find her aid, yet there were no herbs which could heal his wife. It seemed he could do naught but watch the life fade from her. Leowyn felt a small tear drop from her eyes as she heard that, her hands tightly clenching the blanket covering her. She wanted him to tell her that there was a happily ever after, that Aki had managed to save Seppo, but his next sentence killed that hope. In the end, he could do nothing but let her die in his arms. Although he knew that she was in intense pain, she had passed with a smile, for she had been with him at the very end. Yet, that is not where this story ends. Rather, this is only the beginning. After passing, Seppo found herself watching Aki as a departed spirit. She saw that he had seemed to give up his normal routine, instead taking her job as the priest of the shrine. Only when food was low would he journey down the mountain to hunt, otherwise he sat in prayer. Seeing her love ache for her like this, Seppo could not sit idle. She appeared within Aki's dreams, sharing with him the secrets of her temple. She taught him how to see those spirits which had yet to pass, and how to exorcise them so that they could move on. Originally, she had intended for him to use those skills on her, to truly move on from her death. Yet, little did she expect, the next day when he saw her, a smile appeared on his lips. My Seppo. He spoke gently to her. I truly cannot bear to see you go again. Not after seeing you once more. I ask of you, will you spend eternity with me? Leowyn let out a small gasp when she heard that. Seppo was disappointed by his request. Not because he still loved her, but because he knew what he was asking. In the teachings, Seppo told him that a lingering spirit will begin to lose its reason if it does not pass on. I cannot stay as the Seppo that you love, Aki. You know this. You can. He seemed so confident in his words, that Seppo could not help but listen. I thought of a way, if you are willing to try. A way for a lingering spirit to live within a willing host, to be eternal partners in life and in death. So, my Seppo, will you spend eternity with me? For the first time since her death, Seppo could feel tears forming in her eyes. She wanted nothing more than to accept his offer. And only after hearing his explanation did she agree. Through his guidance, Seppo came to live within his body. Finally, Aki left the mountain, his beloved Seppo with him. They faced dangers together again, yet were able to overcome it through their combined powers. Seppo's one regret in life was that she had never been able to return to her family, so Aki visited them. Happy that the story seemed to have a good outcome, Leowyn found herself slowly starting to drift off, even as her father continued telling his story. Chapter 108. The Truth and the Question. After seeing Leowyn falling asleep, I glanced towards the glowing orb that represented the Aki Seppo martial art. I had glanced through it before, hoping to get a quick bit of training in between conversations with her, but what I had found surprised me. Only about half of the information contained within the sphere was instructions on the martial art itself. The other half was explaining its origins, of Aki and Seppo. Though, that does explain why it was the only one that did not have a translated name in the market, since its name was just the names of its founders. As for the story, it was how I told it to Leowyn, though she wasn't awake to hear the end. And, considering everything, she had chosen a good time to fall asleep. I knit my brows together as I thought about the rest of the story. After Aki returned to Seppo's home, he found it lying in ruins. All of her clansmen had been slain by Aki's own father. He did not have much family, but his father had always doted on him. When the two of them ran away together, his father had vented his anger on Seppo's family. Naturally, this drove Aki and Seppo both to the brink of despair and madness. Seppo mourned the loss of her family, but could not bring herself to blame Aki for the sins of his father. Yet, Aki himself was different, blaming both himself and his father for what had happened. After all, if they did not run away, would his father have truly done this? Once again, the two of them left that small town, but this time for a different reason. Both of them wanted to avenge Seppo's family, even if Seppo herself kept that desire buried in her heart. So they trained, becoming stronger than the fiercest of warriors, and fully exploring and evolving their new union. The next time they returned to the city, Aki's father stood waiting for them in front of the gates. He welcomed his son back with a smile, as if nothing had ever gone wrong. Aki's father could not understand the bloodlust contained within his son's eyes, even to the point where he initially failed to fight back when Aki attacked him. His moment of carelessness ultimately led to his undoing, as his own son joined hands with the woman he had come to detest, working together to slay him. But how could that truly lead Aki to finding peace? He had just killed his own father, after all. So for one last time, they left the city, returning to their mountain peak. This time, they never again descended from the shrine. I shook my head as I thought about the true ending to the story. It seemed it really was too much to hope for a happy ending to tales like these. However, it did serve to explain how powerful the technique he developed was. Aki Seppo had strict requirements for the users. Like its original creators, the spirit had to have a powerful bond of trust with the person who they are being bound to. In a sense, it was similar to the spirit I watched battling in the afterlife, though he could only be said to have reached the first stage of this art. Surely, if he had received the information in the sphere, he would have been able to master it entirely. Aki Seppo has 3 stages, though given its nature they are vaguely defined as benchmarks. The first stage, the initial manifestation, has the user channeling his bonded spirit into a form which they find most comfortable, granting certain abilities based on their own power and history. That is how he made those swords that seem to give him extremely powerful attacks. As for its second stage, it was known as true manifestation. This was when you were able to truly personify the spirit into the weapon, bringing out a far greater power that represented that spirit's entire history and personality. According to what the information said, it wasn't uncommon for a true manifestation to make someone comparable to an army on their own. Finally, there was the last stage. Body and soul as one. A stage where the user was able to temporarily switch with their spirit, essentially doubling the variety that they had available in their attacks. Someone who completed all three stages could really become strong, from what I could tell. Yet, I couldn't help but recall the requirements to perform it again. A spirit who has an intense bond of trust with me. Naturally, that couldn't be any of the goddesses' incarnations. Not because of the trust factor, but from what I have been able to tell, their spirits return to them after their incarnations die, rather than going to the afterlife. I could probably bypass that requirement by using a world host. I mean, who would trust me more than myself? The only problem I could see there would be that its soul and mine would be too similar, so I wouldn't really be able to bring out the full power of it. Thinking about it to that point, I couldn't help but turn my attention towards the sleeping Leowin. If there was one person that could meet all of the qualifications, it'd be her. However, could I really do that? I mean, if I were to groom her to be my Seppo, then wouldn't that in itself destroy the bond of trust? Thinking about it, I pulled out a piece of paper, and then began writing a message to Ryan. Blank, underscore, blank, underscore underscore. Mom, what are we doing out here? Leowin asked curiously, glancing around. This was the furthest that she had ever been from the city, so she was confused when her mother had suddenly told her that they were going out for a bit today. Already they had left the plains behind them, walking into a forest that would have normally taken several days to reach, yet their speed seemed far faster than normal. We're almost there. Her mother spoke gently, holding Leowin's hand in hers. Leowin wasn't sure why, but Rinnan seemed nervous today. Her face, which had aged well to barely have any wrinkles when she was over 400 years old, seemed shaken by something. Leowin barely had the mind to notice that no monsters or beasts had approached them since they left. Even for her, it was not uncommon for some monsters to attack when she wandered too far from the city. Yet, they were being left completely undisturbed. It was only after they had walked for another hour when Rinnan finally stopped. The two of them were standing in front of a flowing brook, a large rock sitting next to it which Rinnan walked over and sat on, muttering to herself. Okay. This should be far enough, I think. Mom, what's going on? Leowin asked, starting to grow nervous herself. There were only a few reasons that she could think of as to why her mother led her out here suddenly, so far from town. And none of them were good. Don't panic, dear, Rinnan urged, shaking her head in an attempt to dissuade Leowin of her negative thoughts. I just wanted to tell you something. And we couldn't be near the town when I did. Why? You'll understand when I finish. Rinnan assured her, taking a deep breath. So, you met your father, huh? Leowin's face tightened up when she heard that, her body going stiff. How did you know that? Well, he told me. Rinnan responded with a small smile. He wanted me to let you know a couple things about myself, too. Wait, so you knew? Leowin couldn't hold back from asking. If her mother knew all along about her father, I thought you said that my god's blood came from Ryan. Her tone turned slightly accusatory as she said that, believing that her mother had been knowingly lying to her all these years. Well, I'm not wrong. Rinnan asked with a sheepish smile, looking down and to the side to avoid her daughter's gaze. You are Ryan's daughter. Unless you mean to tell me that I was an abandoned child left in your care, you should start explaining. Leowin's eyes almost seemed to glow as her emotions were thrown into turmoil, her fists tightening beside her. What? No, not at all. We would never do something like that. Rinnan instantly lifted her head up, denying her daughter's words. However, there was only one word that Leowin seemed to focus on. Well, I mean, yeah. Rinnan once again looked down in embarrassment, trying to find the words she wanted to say. After all, I'm Ryan. Her voice turned incredibly small as she said that, almost enough that Leowin would fail to hear. Mother. Those words are blasphemous, and you know it. Leowin recoiled in shock, glancing around to make sure that there was truly nobody to overhear what her mother had just said. It's not like there hadn't been people claiming to be incarnations of the gods before. One woman had almost succeeded in making the church into her pawns when she had an unfortunate accident that caused her magic to turn against her. But it's true. Rinnan almost shouted back, her thin hands hitting the rock below her. And I can prove it, too. Just pray. Not to him, but to Ryon. She crossed her arms beneath her chest, staring at her daughter expectantly. But, Leowyn was worried that if she did this, and attracted the goddess's attention, her mother might not be let off for the words she had spoken. Yet, seeing her determined appearance, she couldn't help but relent. Okay. Holy goddess, I beseech you to offer your forgiveness to my mother, for she has spoken against you and claimed your identity. I fear that age is starting to take its toll on her mind. I implore you to show compassion, as my mother has no ill intent. Leowyn closed her eyes and prayed as sincerely as she could to Ryon, not noticing the incredulous expression on her mother just a few feet away. Hey, I'm not that old. Just who do you think is going crazy? A surprised shout resounded in Leowyn's mind a moment later, nearly causing her to fall to the ground. The voice was unmistakably her mother's, yet she could also feel it as the voice of the goddess. That's not funny. Leowyn muttered in disbelief as she regained her balance, looking to her mother. Had she done something to interfere with her daughter's thoughts? Did not. Rinnan shouted out defensively. This is why I wanted to move so far away from town. I knew you'd never believe me that easily. She grumbled slightly. Leowyn was just about to protest, when her mother's eyes became dull, her body relaxing as if she had suddenly fallen into a sleep. She was just about to rush forward in a panic to help her steady herself when she found her body unable to move, a strange might pressing down on her from all sides. Gradually, a golden light descended from above, another woman appearing within the light next to Rinnan. Gee, goddess, Leowyn said in shock. How could she not recognize the woman whose statue was erected just outside of town? Even without that, anyone would recognize her at a glance, just because of who she was. Please, forgive her. She didn't mean anything by it. Leowyn's mind was racing, fearing that Ryon had descended due to her prayer and Rinnan's previous outburst. She didn't want the goddess to take away her mother, and could only plead for lenience. However, the goddess suddenly had a petulant expression as she looked at Leowyn. How many times do I have to say I'm not crazy? What? Leowyn's eyes opened wide in shock as she heard those words, slowly moving her eyes back towards Rinnan, and then to the goddess again. She could understand the prayer being faked, with her mother's mastery over magic, but to fake the presence of Ryon herself should be well beyond anything she was capable of. But, how? Ryon sighed gently, the pressure on Leowyn's body lessening greatly. I really didn't want to tell you this way, my daughter. I had hoped you could live a fairly normal life. As she spoke, she seemed to superimpose herself over Rinnan, who gradually seemed to wake up again. However, your father seemed insistent that I tell you about us. Leowyn was still struggling to understand what was going on, yet the mention of her father caused a change in her. She seemed to almost become more obedient at the mention of him, wanting to know more. Okay. Please, explain, she said softly, moving to sit next to her mother. Why now? Rinnan chuckled lightly. First, let me tell you something. After that, he wanted me to deliver a question to you. There are things you don't know, things that nobody knows yet. Seeing her daughter nod gently, Rinnan began speaking again. You have seen the winged spirits, my angels. Of course, Leowyn answered. It had taken a few years after she began practicing the ability to see spirits, but she had eventually seen those winged spirits descending and leading others to Ryon's embrace. They were an iconic figure within the church, but due to nobody having conversed with them, little was known about what they were. Well, those aren't really my angels at all. Rinnan shrugged as she spoke. They work for someone else, to lead the departed into a pleasant afterlife. Normally, you'd find out about that when it's your turn, but your father wanted me to tell you early. Why? She couldn't help but ask again. Even though she knew her mother was the goddess now, she didn't feel at all like she did around her father. She had known her mother from birth, so she did not feel nervous talking to her like this. If anything, she was more upset that she didn't hear about this sooner. Because I won't be going there. Rinnan shook her head, reaching out one lightly glowing arm to pull her daughter close. This body, Rinnan, is an incarnation of my power. When she dies, her spirit will simply return to me. I won't be able to wait for you beyond, and can only watch over you from above. Her words struck Leowyn's heart, making her feel a twinge of panic. She recalled how years ago she had spoken to her father about her mother's inevitable death, and knew that these two conversations had to be linked. Then, He won't be there either. Rinnan shook her head again. No, he watches the world from a much higher place. That's why, he asked me to deliver a question to you. He wants you to think about it, and give him the answer yourself when the time comes. After saying that, Rinnan turned her head to look fully at her daughter. His question was, will you be my Seppo? Will you give up your future possibilities, to stay by my side and the side of your mother? When the time comes, I will appear before you again, and ask this question. Leowin, please think carefully. I'm not entirely sure what he means by Seppo, but I can guess from the rest. Rinnan continued after delivering the message. I'll tell you whatever you want to know to help you make your decision. But you have to promise not to let the information spread. People just aren't ready to know about everything yet. Leowin's mind shook as she heard the question, enough that she barely registered what her mother said next. She dumbly nodded her head, still trying to process the information. Naturally, she wanted nothing more than to be able to stay with her mother and father, but, given the words he used, she would truly have to learn everything she could to make the proper decision. Chapter 109. The Once and Future King. I let out a long sigh as I watched Leowin and Ryon gradually walking back towards the town. I had the feeling I'd know what her answer was going to be, but there was no way I'd push her to answer early. No, she'd live a full life first, that way she'd have plenty of time to have her own experiences and the chance to make new connections. Though, there was one thing I needed to test out first. Closing my eyes, I sent my thoughts towards the sleeping lion soul within me. I could still distinctly feel its presence even in the admin room, which was why I considered making her this offer in an attempt to let her spend more time with Ryon and myself. However, it was still important to know if we could bring her out of my body. Focusing, I urged the lion spirit to leave my body, summoning it out into the room around me. A fierce roar echoed in the room, a bright light forming in front of my chest as the spirit seemed to jump directly out of it. Strangely, it did not look at all incorporeal as it would in the mortal world. Instead, it looked just as lifelike as it did the day I fought it. Okay, it died that day, so let's say the day before I fought it. Terra. I mentally called for her, deciding this is as good of a time as any to practice my mental communication skills. Thankfully, I received a response shortly, so I at least did not dial the wrong goddess this time. I thought that the only beings allowed in the admin room were the keeper and any purchased companions. This was something that she had told me long ago, hence why I was performing this test in the first place. However, soon the answer to my question came to me. That's right. Guessing you brought out your spirit beast if you are asking, so let me explain. A spirit bound to you is still considered a part of you. The connection is far stronger than something like a hunter's pet, or a tamer's monster. If you die, it dies, and it can only manifest with your power. And the reason it doesn't look like a ghost anymore. I had a feeling I knew the answer to this one, but I wanted to ask just in case. That part's easy. Remember, up here the energy at our disposal is limitless. The quality of the body your spirit possesses is based on the amount and density of the spiritual energy used to form it. Therefore, when you summon it up here, it appears in a perfect body. Hearing that, I honestly couldn't hold back another question. Okay, but wouldn't that mean I could just cheat and have it drink in the spiritual energy, so that it is stronger when I descend later? I could faintly hear a laugh over the connection. No, a bound spirit can't consume the energies of the administration room. If you tried to force it to, the spirit would likely be destroyed by the overwhelming energy. Okay, so note to self, don't do that. Alright, thanks. Anything in particular that I should pay attention to, now that I'm talking with you? Figured it'd be good to see if there was anything interesting going on that would be good for me to look at. A few people are making some advances. Aha, here's a nice spot for you. I'm putting it on your monitor now. Blank, underscore, blank, underscore underscore. Charn Presley stood at the helm of one of the many ships that sailed the wide blue ocean. His journey was a long one, having already been over a week since they saw land. With him were a dozen ships, each carrying a dozen human men and women. He treated these people as if they were his family, and many of them were indeed. They had not been cast out from the kingdoms, but rather chose to leave, to start their own life beyond the sea. They did not agree with many of the views of those self-righteous kingdoms, those who thought themselves as gods. There was but one lord in his heart, and she did not sit upon a mortal throne. As such, he and his kin, and those who wished to join him had left, unsure of what they may find beyond the horizon. They brought with them enough food for a few more days, but after that they would have to rely on catching the fish that swam beneath their sails. It was not an impossible task, but Charn had already seen the fearsome might of the ocean beasts. Originally, there had not been 12, but 15 ships as part of this voyage. Yet, 3 days after their departure, a great shadow appeared from beneath the water. A snake as long as a city, with a mouth that could swallow a castle's gates appeared from the water. The beast was repulsive to behold, with scale and flesh dropping off its length as quickly as the waters that surrounded it. The creature had no intelligence within its gaze, and immediately rushed towards them, swallowing 3 ships in 3 strides. Through the holes in its flesh, we could see the broken wood and flailing bodies falling down its throat. Yet after it swallowed those ships, it seemed placated, and once more sank beneath the waves. It was not that they had no power to fight it. The clan of Presley was a clan of mighty warriors, yet this was a creature which moved too fast, and with too much force for them to face. After it left, they could only pray to Baihaina, as well as the spirits of the seas and skies to watch over them for the rest of the journey. Father, I see land. The youngest child aboard Charn's ship called out from the front. His eyes had been ever focused forward. Despite his young age, none dared question his sight. He had begun training as a monk, and had long since learned how to enhance his sight far beyond normal means. Good, Elphus, Charn said with a laugh. If his son could see land, then it was at most another 2 days away. If they could make it for 2 more days, then they could reach this new land. He let his voice build up in his throat, shouting out for his words to be carried to the nearby ships. We have land, men. The spirits have heard our call, and the goddess has blessed our travel. After his voice echoed out, he could hear his words being repeated again, the message being spread beyond to all of the ships. Cheers could be heard from the weary men and women who longed to reach shore. These sailors moved with renewed vigor, knowing that their new home was just beyond the horizon. With fair winds and clear weather, Charn and his fleet arrived at an empty shore. This was no small island, and from the moment they saw it they could not find its ends upon the horizon. From a single glance, it was clear that the place had never been touched by the hands of men. This was made even more obvious the moment their ships pulled in near the beach. Each one dropped a large stone tied to a rope, anchoring them in position. While it wouldn't protect them from the beasts beneath the waves, this would at least prevent them from drifting back to sea. From there, every man, woman and child dove into the water, quickly finding themselves able to stand and run to shore. Before the eyes of every traveler, the spirits sent their message. You are among the first group in history to successfully travel to a new land by way of sea. This is a grand achievement, earning all present the title of Beyond the Seas. While at sea, beast and monsters weaker than you will flee your presence, while those too weak to perceive it will be drawn to you. Charn couldn't help but laugh uproariously at the blessing that the spirits gave. Though some may see the last sentence as troublesome, those who traveled the waters knew the importance of keeping fish nearby. This deterrent would likely be ineffective against the great beast that had consumed their kinsmen, but against the more common threats it would suffice. Come, men, he shouted with a wild smile on his aged face. Let us build our new home. It was at this point that the young boy who had originally spotted the island came up to him. He was eager to hunt for food and help with the construction, but first there was a question that must be asked. Father, shouldn't we name this place? The spirits have told us that we were here first, after all. Though his child was young, his insights often stretched far beyond his years. Charn nodded his head in agreement with another laugh. All right, boy. Since you were first to see the island, you shall be the one to name it. Do not shame us after we have come all this way. I'm sure we'd hate to have to find a new land already. A few of the nearby kin laughed at his words. The child took the task seriously, sinking into thought as he came up with the name. Then, we shall call it Rokindral. He nodded his head, earning an approving smile from his father. A fine name. Now, go along. There is still work to be done. He shouted, causing his youngest son to immediately begin running into the nearby forest, where many had already disappeared to begin work. Blank, underscore, blank, underscore underscore. I couldn't help but chuckle dryly as I watched this scene. Tara was certainly right, the first people to settle on an island was worthy of a bit of attention. While it might seem small, that was only in comparison to the gigantic proportions of the continents. There would still be enough land for them to explore and cultivate for many generations to come. But first, Irena, can we talk for a moment? Of course, Dale. What's the matter? Her response came almost as soon as I had finished asking my question. I saw a monster just now in the world below, in the seas. It looked to be an undead creature. I thought your people were taking care to make sure that couldn't happen. Naturally, I had to ask that. The presence of undead horrors within the sea was likely more important than even the first settlers to a new land. Dale, her reluctant tone came through the connection. My people cannot easily traverse the depths of the oceans, even if they had the numbers to do so. It is unfortunate, but until we find a race more suitable for that, there is nothing that I can do to stop the appearance of undead within the sea. Even me acting personally, I would not be able to harvest all of those souls more than once a year, and that is only assuming that they did not resist. It's all right, I'm not blaming you. I just wanted to clearly understand what's going on. I could see how it would be difficult. If a spirit had to focus on maintaining their form with water constantly pushing through it, they'd hardly be able to use the same kind of battle tactics that they could on the surface. Not to mention that there are likely far more creatures beneath the seas than on land. If I gave someone a domain that controlled the ocean and its wildlife, would that make it easier to take care of those creatures? I asked. While there were no free domains waiting to be assigned, I could still purchase one for someone. Perhaps. If I work together with them, then we should be able to take care of most of the spirits with our joint power. Hearing that, I nodded my head, before reaching out to contact Bihana. Free for a moment. I was getting a lot of practice with this mental communication today, though I'd have to ask the goddesses for feedback later to make sure I wasn't broadcasting too loud or anything. As long as you meant to call me and not someone else, sure. Bihana's voice came back to me through the connection. What's up? I want to give you a new domain. Your people were the first to cross the water and reach a new land, so I was thinking about giving you the ocean's domain. Of course, there are other reasons too. At first, I could feel excitement coming through the link, but it was soon extinguished by a small grumbling tone. You want to push more work off onto me. Irina's forces can't clean up the spirits in the water. She says that if she works with someone that has the appropriate domain, then the two of you should be able to take care of it. Then why don't you just give her the ocean's domain? A somewhat frustrated tone responded to me, making me chuckle dryly. Well, I thought about it, but really wouldn't it make little sense for the goddess of the underworld and justice, who no living being knows about, to receive this domain? It'd be more fitting for one of the living gods, with you being first on the list. I did my best to explain, feeling her reluctance gradually lessening as I did. All right. Fine. I'll take the ocean's domain. At least it will give me something to worry about that isn't politics. I swear, if you had come to me with another government-related domain, I probably would have driven my head through a wall. I felt a small grin forming on my face. So you don't want to be the goddess of nobility, then? I teased lightly, hearing an almost furious scream from the connection at the mere thought of getting that title. With a laugh, I let go of the connection, and brought up the market to buy the domain. Thankfully, the first non-free domain for a given god or goddess was only 20 points, so it wasn't much to worry about. With that small distraction out of the way, I once again began fast-forwarding, curious how my daughter would react to all of the information that was given to her. My daughter. The thought still felt a bit strange, given that she was almost 10 times as old as I was now, but it also made me feel good. In this world, I could say that she was the only person that was actually family, after all. Chapter 110. A Mother's Love. Leowin's decision was not an easy one. In fact, she wasn't really sure what she wanted when her mother asked her that question. Yes, of course she wanted to spend the rest of her time with her mother and father, but she couldn't say that was all she wanted. Not without knowing more. For the next few weeks after they got home, she began asking her mother any questions she could think of, asking both about the underworld and the world in which her father lived. Because her mother had been told to answer any of her questions, Leowin learned things which she knew nobody else in the world would know. She learned that the gods were people like them, just with vastly superior powers and lifespans. The wisdom of the gods was not some all-knowing power that permeated the world, but a wisdom built on age. And she even learned that there were far more races present in the world than just the elves. Fantastical races that she had never imagined, beings that seemed almost impossible for her to consider. This questioning lasted for roughly a month, before she finally stopped asking anymore. One reason was because she could not think of anything else she wanted to ask, and the other was because her mother seemed to have fallen ill. Her lively and energetic mother was bedridden, her face far paler than normal. The strangest thing about this disease was that the bar of life did not appear above her head as it normally did when someone fell ill. This was, however, a relief to Leowin instead of cause for concern. If the bar of life failed to appear, it meant her life was not truly in danger. What's wrong, mother? She asked, sitting beside her mother's bed and gently stroking her cheek with a wet rag. With your abilities, surely you can heal yourself. Now that she knew her mother was a goddess, it was hard to associate her with the same mortal faults that others suffered. Rinnan, however, simply smiled. My power does not cover healing. And, I am not sure what exactly is wrong with me, either. Her voice was weak as she spoke, almost tired. Can you ask that other goddess? The one you said knows more than she speaks. Leowin asked, her tone starting to grow worried. If even a goddess did not know what was wrong, then she could not entirely trust the bar of life. Rinnan nodded her head, closing her eyes. Leowin assumed that she was focusing on her divine self, to ask the other goddess why she was feeling this way. From what she had learned, all of the gods had friendly relations with each other, so there was no reason that they wouldn't help. Ah. Her voice weakly spoke out after a few minutes. Well, this is embarrassing. Mother. Leowin asked as she looked to Rinnan. This is no illness. Rinnan slowly shook her head. It seems I was mistaken when I showed myself before. A mortal body cannot hold my full power. A dry chuckle escaped her lips. Seeing her daughter starting to show a panicked expression, she smiled warmly. Don't worry, this won't kill me. The energies within my body were thrown into disarray. Once I focus on fixing them for a while, I'll be fine. After saying that, a mischievous glint appeared in her eyes. Though, that does mean you'll have to cook for me. I might end up ill after all. Mother. Leowin shouted, feeling her ears turning red. It was true that she didn't know how to cook, but that wasn't her fault. In order to help with the issues of her body, her mother had never allowed her to learn the chef class. However, now, she was at the pinnacle of power, or what her mother called the level limit. Even if she began cooking, she wouldn't earn the class. I was teasing you, dear. I know you won't poison me. Though she said that, her mother still smiled playfully. If anything, she had become even more playful with Leowin after revealing her true self, no longer feeling like she had to pretend to be some poor, aging mother. Well, you stay here, and I'll get you some soup. Leowin said with a small sigh, moving down and preparing a breakfast for her mother. After that incident, Rinnan truly did recover to her normal condition after a few days. Yet, Leowin still didn't come up with any more questions to ask. Naturally, she asked if there was anything else that she needed to know, but her mother didn't seem able to come up with anything either. Instead, she planned to wait for the next chance that she could speak with her father instead. Blank, underscore, blank, underscore underscore. From the admin room, I watched as Leowin went about her life, occasionally checking to see if there were other interesting developments happening throughout the world. I had to appreciate the irony when Elphys Presley, king of Rokindrel, assumed the throne. Aside from that, I saw that the ninjas had finally begun spreading out beyond their first city, creating more ninja villages within the forest. I still had my conversations with Leowin, though their subjects had changed somewhat. Instead of only telling me about how her year had been, she began asking me about my own life, and the world I used to live in. At first, I was surprised she even knew about that, but it seemed she really had been asking Rinnan anything she could think of. After the first 10 years, she probably knew more about the afterlife than I did myself, so she stopped asking questions about that. Instead, she focused more on getting to know me as a person. She had stopped seeing me just as some almighty entity, which was honestly a relief. Of course, I would still always end our conversations with a story, but now she knew where these stories came from. Blank, underscore, blank, underscore underscore. As the years passed, gradually Rinnan once again found herself weakening. This time, however, it was not due to her divine powers interfering with her body, but rather age itself. As she approached the end of her lifespan, her daughter was constantly with her, taking care of her in any way she could. To the surprise of both mother and daughter, there was even a messenger sent from the capital of Gandor. Word had spread that the mad enchanter was dying, so a scroll of parchment arrived from the queen herself. By the time it arrived, Rinnan was having problems reading properly, so she had asked her daughter to read it to her. Rinnan, my dear friend. I have heard of the hardships you face in these final hours, and offer my sincere apologies. I had not been aware of the schemes of the church regarding your daughter, but they have now been brought to my attention. I have not forgotten the services you have done for us, or the debts that have long been owed. Leowin read the scroll, feeling her eyes water as she saw the contents. Even knowing that her mother was not truly dying, this was still an extremely sad event for her. You have gone beyond your duty to help my people, as you did for my mother before me. For this, I offer you one final reward. May you meet the goddess happily, knowing your daughter is safe. I will welcome her into my court, and offer her a position at my side. I shall always strive to do my best to protect her from those who seek to misuse her gifts. And though I cannot say that she will be able to change the way people see her, know that to me, she will always be the daughter of a dear friend. When Leowin had finished reading the scroll, she rolled it back up and placed it beside her. Rinnan had a peaceful smile on her face as she heard the contents. Finally, somewhere else you can be happy when I'm gone. Maybe you'll even be able to make new friends. Her voice was truly weak now, weaker than it had ever been. Don't worry, mother. Leowin spoke gently to her, clutching her hand as she sat next to her bed. I'll take care of myself. Just wait for me, and I'll see you again someday. Unlike most when their loved ones were passing, Leowin did not treat this as a true goodbye. To her, who knew the truth, she knew that she would have another chance to see her again, it would just take time. Rinnan nodded her head slowly. Then, until we meet again, my daughter. She spoke, her eyes slowly closing. However, even as the last vestige of strength in her hand faded away, Leowin heard her mother's voice within her head once more. Let me do one last thing, to show those ignorant people not to mess with my daughter. Unlike the voice of her dying mother, this one was filled with life and determination. Suddenly, a golden light descended from above, covering the entire city of Cowabunga. Those who saw this light immediately stopped what they were doing, and stared into the sky. This had only ever happened once before, when the city was threatened with destruction. Now, once again, the illusory figure of the goddess descended. This time, it was above a building in the middle of town, where the mad enchanter had lived. Nobody would ever be able to forget this day, when the goddess herself personally guided the soul of a mortal into her arms. From the gentle smile that could be easily seen on her face, they knew that the soul she came to collect was one that she cared for deeply. Though many had seen her angels come to collect the souls of the fallen, the goddess herself had never made such an appearance. There were those who lined up around the house to pray, treating it more like a temple than the actual temple within the city. Even the local priests could not help themselves but bow in worship when they saw this. Yet, through all of this, only one person had a different reaction. Within the house, Leowin had a happy smile on her face, her tears falling freely. Stupid mom. Why'd you have to go and do that? She asked, a small laugh escaping her throat as she wiped away her tears. Ah, you didn't like it. Ryon's voice appeared in her mind again, causing her smile to widen slightly. I loved it. Thanks. Though, she did know that she would have to leave the city now, and take up that offer to live with the queen. The next day, Leowin set out in the middle of the night, carrying only what she needed to make it to the capital. Although monsters sought to obstruct her travel, there were none capable of stopping her. Even among those at the pinnacle, she could be considered one of the strongest. After all, she had not only her levels, but the blessing which doubled her strength. The journey to the capital was the longest she had ever been outside of the city, as well as the farthest she had ever gone from home. Yet, she did not feel like she was alone. Every night, she spoke with her mother, just as she did with her father on her birthdays. When she arrived at the capital of Gandor, Kauklua, she found the queen already waiting for her outside the city gates. On either side of her stood a guard in full leather armor, the queen herself wearing an elegant dress. She said you were coming. The queen spoke with a smile as she greeted Leowin. Really, mother, you just don't know when to quit, huh? Leowin thought internally, though couldn't bring herself to be upset over this. Thank you for meeting me, my queen, she said as she approached. She wasn't sure what was going to happen from now on, but she knew that one chapter of her life was coming to a close, and another one soon to begin. Yet for her, she felt like she already knew the ending to her own story. Chapter 111. A Daughter's Courage. After joining the Queen's court, Leowin was offered a variety of jobs to choose from. No matter what her position was, the public couldn't so easily accept her living in the Queen's castle unless she actually did something. But, that was just fine with her. Ever since she left Cowabunga, she knew exactly what she wanted to do. Leowin became the Queen's personal bodyguard. To test her qualifications, she was allowed to spar against the Queen's current knights and guards. No matter who she fought, however, her strength proved enough to overpower any mortal enemy. It was to such a degree that she was granted a new title. From then on, Leowyn was known as the Goddess's Knight. Unfortunately, that title was rather empty without being able to receive the Knight class, but nobody seemed to mind that fact much. After all, she was already as strong as she could be. Nobody dared to question that fact. As the Queen's strongest knight, Leowyn openly volunteered for even the most dangerous of missions. Whether it was protecting the Queen herself on an outing, or going to defeat a powerful monster roaming the lands. She always gave off an air of invincibility to those that knew about her. Granted, there were times when the church attempted to seize her for their own, now that her mother was no longer around. Those that did, however, learned that she was an even more monstrous existence than her mother. Without fail, the Queen had them put to death after Leowyn dragged them before her. Only Leowyn herself knew why she was doing this. It wasn't for anything as special as proving herself to be the best of the best. No, part of her was looking forward to her failure. She was still living her life to the fullest, not wanting to leave any regrets behind, but she knew what she really wanted. As for her social life, it's not that she didn't try to have one. Whenever the situation arose, she would try to make friends. At one point, she even tried to find a suitor. However, those people she attempted to befriend all saw her as the daughter of Ryon, or the Knight of the Goddess, not as Leowyn. Still, it was not as if she was unable to enjoy her life. With her role as the Queen's guard, she was able to travel and see places that she had never seen before. She was able to fight exciting battles, and feel the thrills that had always been denied her. Naturally, her father had asked her to stop such a dangerous life. He wanted her to live a long, fulfilling life, where she could enjoy any pleasures she wanted. However, that is not the kind of life she wanted. She did not want to live a modest life. No, she was Ryon and Dale's little star. She would burn bright, let her glory shine upon the elves for generations. With all of her achievements, there was one that truly set her apart from the rest. A monster that was destroying nearby cities. This was a winged lizard that spouted fire from its mouth. From her mother, Leowyn knew it was a lesser dragon, one of the strongest monsters in existence. In terms of level, it was 250, a full 100 higher than anyone else. Along with many other knights, Leowyn had been chosen to bring the beast down. However, now she stood to face it alone. Her abilities had allowed her to last longer than her comrades under the breath of the dragon. This is it, Leowyn thought to herself. This is where I will shine. Her bow had long since turned to ash, her sword a pile of molten slag. Her body was charred black with burns, the only thing keeping her moving being the protection of her ki. In truth, it would not be hard for Leowyn to kill this dragon on her own. Though its scales were strong, they were not stronger than her fists enhanced by ki. The problem was that the dragon never stopped flying. Rather than landing to confront her, it attacked in swooping motions, spraying down blue fire from its mouth. And as Leowyn watched, it was getting ready to do just that again. She saw it soaring high into the sky, before moving into a downward dive. I am Leowyn Marden, daughter of two gods. My father gave birth to this world, and my mother filled it with her magic and her love. She whispered to herself, urging her ki to spread through her body. Her silver hair had been scorched off her head, her mother's dress ashes at her feet. Today, I will become a burning star for them. Her body seemed to almost glow as she spoke, looking up at the dragon that had opened its mouth. Her mouth curved up into a smile, no longer able to feel the pain of her burns. Leowyn crouched down briefly, before launching herself with her full strength into the air. The ground beneath her feet exploded, sending her flying upwards like an arrow shot from a bow. Her fists seemed to ignite as she clenched them. A dragon's roar could be heard, not from the beast above, but from the girl flying into it from below. She wasn't even aware of what she was doing, but in that moment the image of a dragon superimposed itself over her fist. When she threw her fist forward to meet the flames of the dragon's breath, the golden image surrounding her fist opened its maw, swallowing whole the flames that sought to burn her. The dragon's flames seemed to hold no power over the key dragon that she had formed. And with its diving momentum, the lesser dragon was unable to stop itself from colliding with the projection itself, followed soon after by Leowyn's fist. A pained cry filled the sky as Leowyn's arm shattered under the force of her own punch. Yet, the cry did not come from her, as blood gushed out of the dragon's head. Leowyn turned her body in midair by borrowing the force of the collision, bringing her leg high above her. That same golden light shined bright on her leg as she brought it down like an axe, severing scale, flesh, and bone. Using the power she did not understand, she had managed to split the dragon's head in two. However, there was a cost for such power, as her body had become incomparably weak. All of her ki had been used in the jump, as well as that first punch. As she fell towards the ground, even she did not know where she had drawn the energy for that last attack, or even what it was. All she knew was that she had done it. She had become a burning star in elven history. The woman who slayed the dragon. She watched the bar of her life slowly trickling down to nothing, emptying before she had even hit the ground. Will you be waiting for me, father? She asked herself as she closed her eyes, a gentle smile on her face. Will you be proud of me? Blank, underscore, blank, underscore underscore. I was dumbfounded, to say the least, as I watched Leowen battling the dragon. The knights with her were all fairly normal, only in the lower hundreds for levels. After the first few rounds of Dragon's Breath, they had all died, with only Leowen remaining. I had already prepared the screen to descend again to meet her, when suddenly another notification appeared. Leowen Marden has requested access to divine power. Do you wish to embody her with the powers of a Templar? You can do it, Leowen. I thought to myself with a smile as I accepted. Seeing her body begin to glow, I could feel the divine power coursing through her. I'm not sure how she had created the dragon key fist that she struck out with, but the kick she used afterwards had been filled with divine energy. At that moment, she had truly become an agent of the gods. With the battle over, and both parties falling to the ground, I hit the button to descend. Blank, underscore, blank, underscore underscore. Leowen opened her eyes, feeling the world around her changing. Looking down to herself, she saw her body return to its normal condition. Her silver hair had returned, and even the dress that she had always worn was once again on her. If there was anything different, it was that she was slightly transparent, and floating above the ground. So this is what it's like to be dead, she said to herself as she glanced at the charred husk that laid a few feet away from her, as well as the much larger body of the dragon that had fallen nearby. A satisfied grin floated on her face until she saw a ghostly form arising from it as well. Oh, I didn't think about this part. She braced herself for another battle, ready to fight again, until a sharp shout caused the dragon's body to shake. Get out of here, the voice commanded, and even Leowen could feel her spirit shaking. As for the dragon, it glanced at the source of the noise in terror, before turning and flying away as fast as it could. When Leowen saw the figure that had chased away the dragon, she let out a gentle sigh. I knew you'd be here, she said as she looked at her father. I am. And I am proud of you. She could feel her ears redden as he said that. Yes, I heard you. Now, I think you've been waiting for this, Leowen, do. Yes. She didn't even let him finish as she ran up to her father, wrapping her arms around his slender frame and pulling him into the first hug she had ever been able to share with him. Or at least, she tried to, before falling through him. Realizing that he was not in the form of a spirit, her ears reddened again. Still, she gave her answer with all the determination she had been saving up for over a century. Yes, please let me stay with you and mother. I want to meet all of the gods and goddesses, and watch the world grow with you. I want to see how you live, and see all those other races mother told me about. He seemed dazed by the sudden interruption and admission, but soon a small smile formed on his face. All right, then I need you to not resist this, he told her as he reached a hand out to her, gently stroking her cheek. Strangely, she could actually feel this. She could feel his power seeping into her, and hers being drawn into him. Leowen Marden, my daughter. Do you wish to join me? This will only work properly if you give your consent now, and this is the last chance to turn back. I do. She nodded her head immediately. When the words left her lips, she found herself being drawn into him. Her spirit merged with his, and she found herself living in a land of gray fog. At first, she thought that he had sent her to the afterlife instead of taking her with him like he had said. But then, she felt the bond with him, that which had always been there, but stronger than ever before. When she closed her eyes, she could see out into the burning landscape that she had just been standing in. It did not take her long to figure out that she was looking through his eyes. Father, can you hear me? I can. She heard the voice from all around her. Do you want to go ahead and meet Ryon first? No sooner had the question asked than she nodded her head emphatically. Please, let me see her again. She could see a blue light shining in front of her father before the scenery changed. Soon, she saw a wooden room, a wide bed decorated in a manner she had never seen with wide red silks. But more importantly, she saw her mother, Ryon, sitting on the bed. She didn't even get the chance to ask before she felt a strange force pulling her from the gray world. Leowin found herself standing between her father and mother. Her body was no longer transparent, but looked as if she was full of life. Without waiting for an explanation, she jumped forward, tackling her mother to the bed and wrapping her arms around her. "I'm home," she said with a happy voice. "Welcome home, Leowin," she heard her mother say, her arms wrapping around Leowin as well. "I'm so glad you chose to come back with him." Chapter 112. Meeting the family. I couldn't help but smile as I watched Leowin sitting on the bed next to Ryan. "So, how is it? Uncomfortable at all?" She had just received her spirit body, so I wanted to make sure that there weren't any problems with it. Of course, it wasn't like I knew what to do if she did have a problem, but still. She glanced over to me with a gentle smile as she thought about it, before shaking her head. "No, everything feels fine. It's almost hard to believe that I died just now." She glanced down to the floor, as if doing so would let her see her burnt body in the world below. She let out a deep breath, looking up to me as one hand gently held her mother's. "So, what do we do now? Is there some kind of ritual or something I should know about?" Mom said that doing this wouldn't make me a goddess, but still. I shook my head at her question. "No, nothing like that. If you'd like, you can go with Ryan to meet the rest of the people up here. I'm sure that they'd all be happy to meet you." Her face seemed to light up at those words, the idea of making friends who wouldn't care at all about her status. She nodded quickly after I made that offer, looking hopefully at Ryan. "Please, Mom," she pleaded, her silver eyes practically sparkling. Ryan simply laughed, standing up and pulling Leowin along with her. All right. What will you be doing in the meanwhile, Dale?" Ryan asked curiously before Leowin had the chance to drag her out of the room. "I want to check on a few things in the world, see if there are any major improvements to note," I answered, moving to sit back down at the computer desk. "I'll be back soon, Father." I heard Leowin calling to me as her and Ryan left the room, leaving me alone in it. I had a feeling that it would be a few hours, at least, before they came back. Plenty of time for me to look through the different areas to see if there was anything special. First, let's check on the Herrick. It's been a while since I paid special attention to them. Blank, underscore, blank, underscore, underscore. A loud crash echoed through the dense jungle as a massive beast fell from a tree. On its head, a small hole could be seen, through which blood continuously leaked. The ground seemed to briefly shake as a green-skinned figure approached. On its slightly elongated head were three slanted eyes, the middle one wide open with a yellow glow on its pupil. The Herrick male nodded as he looked over his prey, feeling the energy within his body. "Good. Still need work." His speech was rough, unrefined. The Herrick had only just developed a proper language, so it had yet to fully take hold for the older ones like him. Looking down at his hand, the glow within his eye faded gradually. He could feel various energies coursing through him. The Herrick was a warrior race, so it was only natural that their bodies were filled to the brim with ki. But even so, many practiced mana as well. As for this man, he was different than most. His body had another energy that most were still unable to grasp. This was the energy offered to him by the gods for his devotion. A power which stood above all others. "The Templar has grown stronger." An ancient voice rang in his ears, causing him to nod his head in satisfaction. This voice spoke to all of his people, but only when they earned it. As he was contemplating this, a loud screech filled the air, gathering his attention. With a grunt, the Herrick turned his head to find a giant ape hanging from a tree above him. He had just killed the ape's mate, so it was only reasonable that it would appear to get revenge. "Stupid monkey." The Herrick spoke, and its middle eye again opened wide, beginning to glow with a golden light. "In Sherrick's name, die." As he spoke, the golden glow shot out from his eye like a spear, stabbing into the ape's head before it was able to respond. Like its mate, it fell lifelessly to the ground. The Herrick looked at the two fallen monsters before casually grabbing a leg from each, turning and dragging them back to his encampment. He had never had a family of his own, and such there had never been anyone to name him. The first name he took was given to him by the mighty Sherrick, the god who dwelled within the woods. It was a name whispered to none but himself. Templar returned to the tribe with the results of his hunt. Blank, underscore, blank, underscore, underscore. "Well, that's interesting," I muttered slightly as I watched the Herrick. Sherrick was obviously not a real god, but at the same time it wasn't an actual Herrick either. From what I could tell after briefly glancing into The minds of a few Heroks, it was something that they came up with. A personal deity that ruled the forest. The fact that this Herrick was able to unlock divine power by worshipping it was surprising. I mean, I always expected them to get clerics and Templars more easily than other races due to not being bound to a single god. However, I had imagined that they would have to pray to the heavens for help, not the gods that they themselves create. Though, tracing the power back still led to the admin room. It's not like their belief actually created a god. That would be rather scary if it was possible. Just thinking about that made me shiver a bit. One thing did cross my mind, however. I received a prompt about letting Leowin become a Templar. Do the gods receive something like that for all of them? Out of curiosity, I sent my question to Terra, the obvious target for such a thing. A moment later, her reply came back with a rather amused tone. We do get messages for letting anyone borrow our power, whether it is as a Templar, priest, cleric, or even a paladin. It all depends on which god the person worships. For the Herrick, each one goes to a majority vote, since they don't worship a particular god. And since I'm not actually a god, I don't have to vote for all of them. I was suddenly much more thankful that there weren't any people left that were able to view me as a god like Leowin had. Part of me worried that the ninja village might do so, but there had been no sign of that so far. Speaking of which, I sent a glance towards the ninja village, wanting to see if anything interesting had taken place. What I found, I suppose it qualified. The ninjas were now spread out, well beyond just one city. That alone would not qualify as interesting, however. It was the arrangement of the cities that caught my eye. Each one was almost perfectly circular in shape, with wooden bridges connecting treetop buildings. From an aerial view, each one appeared to be a complex spell diagram. Like the elves, the ninjas had also discovered the existence of monster cores. This was evident by a shrine located in the center of each village, with an altar that had one such core embedded in it. If I had to guess, the shrine was meant to serve as a power source in an emergency, with the entire city activating the spell. Well, it looks like they didn't learn too much about wards yet, if they are taking that approach. Before I left to turn my view elsewhere, I saw something else in the ninja village that caught my eye. Someone had discovered another use for monster cores. I saw an alchemist grinding one into a fine dust, before mixing it with the blood of a monster. When the process was done, he dipped a thin brush in the mixture, using it as ink to write on a parchment. This must be their next step in chakra research. Having seen enough, I turned to look at the dwarves. For them, their kingdoms had changed quite a lot from my last glance. Purely from size alone, the Iron Mountain dwarves possessed the largest and most powerful kingdom, spanning across several long mountain ranges. Like an anthill, they made their homes deep within the core of a mountain, mining out whatever they needed. Many of their mountains had the outward appearance of a volcano, due to the forges placed in the uppermost levels, and the ventilation tunnels which had been dug towards the mountain's peak. When I looked at those forges, I found that the hammers of many blacksmiths were no longer copper, and instead were using blackened iron. Some even had enchantments enhancing their usefulness. Of course, that was not the only area where the dwarves had advanced over these few hundred years. Arguably more spectacular was their advancement in brewing. When I found one of their taverns, I even managed to see a guard who had hit the level cap drunk to the point of passing out. This showed that they had managed to create an extremely powerful drink. I was about to take a look at the centaurs and halflings, when the door to my bedroom opened again. Turning to see who it was, I saw Leowin with a wide grin on her face. To my surprise, she was no longer being escorted by Ryon, and instead had found her way back on her own. Did you already meet with everyone? I asked curiously. I wasn't sure how long I had been looking at those three races, but it didn't feel like long enough for her to meet and interact with everyone. Mother asked everyone to meet us in the living room, so I saw them all together. She answered, as if having heard my thoughts. I never thought that there would be so many people like her, even though she explained it to me before. It is so hard to believe. They didn't try to tease you or anything, did they? Huh, no, they were wonderful. She exclaimed with an earnest smile. The little one, Rivy. She even asked if she could call me her sister. I've never seen so many people who genuinely wanted to be friends before. I couldn't help but chuckle at that. You might have been a demigod to the people down there, but up here everyone is a god. To them, you're just another friendly face. That's the thing. I've always wanted something like that, she said with a wistful sigh, moving back to the bed and sprawling out on it. Everyone saw me as Ryon's daughter, or the Queen's holy knight. Even the Queen herself mostly saw me that way, no matter how hard she tried not to. I faintly nodded my head at her words. Well, you won't have to worry about that here. I doubt anyone is going to worship you in this group. I felt myself chuckle as I said that, though she looked at me with a small grin. Calliope kept trying to pull me into a duel, wanting to see how the demi-goddess strength held up. I was honestly a bit worried. If, Bihana, right. If she didn't keep chasing her off, I might not have been able to get back as soon. I was a bit surprised that Bihana would do that, but it wasn't really a bad thing. Leowin slowly sat up in the bed, testing out its softness with her hands, before looking over at me. So, when do we begin training? You let me come all the way up here, so I don't want to be useless after all of that. She asked, her expression suddenly turning serious. With a sigh, I pulled out the glowing orb from my desk, and tossed it at her. This has the training method for Akisepo inside of it. It'll be easier for you to understand if you absorb the information yourself. Just hold the orb and focus on what you want to learn. Although startled by the unexpected object tossed at her, Leowin managed to catch it at the last moment, nearly fumbling and falling back in the bed. She glanced curiously at the sphere, before closing her eyes in focus. Ouch. Only a few moments later, she dropped the information sphere on the bed, bringing a hand up to her head. Didn't know it would hurt like that. Try to take it a bit slow. I urged her. We're not lacking in time. I wasn't expecting her to hurt herself by taking in too much information at once, but even I had gotten a headache when I did this. Once you've learned the methods to train the spirit, we'll get started. Chapter 113. Necessary Education. After Leowin finished absorbing the information, I let her return to my spiritual realm, so that she could begin practicing. This part of her training wasn't something she needed my help in, and was actually more effective if I was not involved with it. I let her know to inform me when she was done, and began looking over the world. It's grown quite well, hasn't it? I mused to myself, thinking about everything that had happened. However, there was still more to do yet. Not only for this world, but I wanted to get a second one going before too long, now that I had an idea of what I was doing. Pulling out a paper, I began writing a message to Ryon. I considered using the mental communication again, but there was the chance that might distract Leowin. Is there anything you think we should get for the world? When I glanced at my points, I happily discovered that some more royalties and advancements had come in. By now, my points totaled at 1975, meaning I could essentially buy whatever I wanted for my world at this stage, within reason of course. Unfortunately, it seemed like I didn't get any new special achievements, though in some ways that was a good thing. They didn't always give a beneficial effect, after all. Is she already training? I heard Ryon ask from the doorway. When I glanced over, I could see her searching the room, likely looking for Leowin. She said she was going to head back here for that. Or did she get lost? I chuckled lightly when I heard the second question. No, she's training the spirit techniques right now. So, I take it you found something you want me to get, since you came here in person. Ryon nodded her head slightly, moving over to sit on the bed. With a soft smile, she rubbed at the spot where her and Leowin were sitting before. Right, there's a few things I have in mind. Honestly, the world is just advancing so much faster than I thought it would, by what Terra explained to us. Probably because all of you are actually helping your people. I mused aloud as I glanced at the map again. It had been around 2000 or so years since the start of the world, yet they were already in the early Metal Ages. That's several times faster than what it was in my world. Exactly, and I think that's a bit of a problem, in some areas. Ryon explained. With us offering guidance to our people, their advancements in magic and technology have both been quite amazing. Even I've been able to learn a few things by watching them. But that's leading to certain other areas being underdeveloped. As she said that, she closed her eyes, sighing softly. The biggest example would be Ki. It has the potential to be every bit as powerful as magic, yet because people have been discovering more and more about magic, they haven't developed much for Ki. Yes, they stumbled upon elemental Ki and Ki paths, but that's it. They haven't developed the Ki paths into a proper form, nor explored any of the abilities that are possible with elemental Ki. So, you're saying that we should encourage a bit more of a focus in Ki for a little while? I asked, somewhat confused. I could get why Ki being overlooked might be a problem, but it didn't seem as bad as she was saying. Not quite. What I'm getting at is that we need a system of education beyond classes. Something to help people gain a rounded education, without information being lost to time. I've already started trying to implement that with the elves, and I noticed Terra convincing the beastkin goddesses to do the same. But, this is creating another problem with the level limit. Ryan knit her brows together as she continued her explanation. With my system of education for the elves, it is an almost mandatory process for children to learn of the basic classes. Before graduation, each student will have 5 levels in Scholar, Mage, Monk, and Druid. If they choose to, there is also an extra course that teaches the Priest and Warrior classes. Now, 5 levels is by no means a grand boost in power. So, by the time they've finished, and have either 20 or 30 levels, they'll also likely have some as a chef or a farmer, depending on their home life, maybe even others. There was one student my race had that managed to reach a total level of 80 before graduating, because he was taking multiple production classes in order to provide for his family. So, I should raise the level cap again. I had noticed a while ago that there were a large number of people who were stuck at the current cap, so it didn't seem too much of a stretch to raise it again. Maybe buy some information, and whisper words to certain people to get the lacking areas caught up. Ryan nodded her head with a smile when I asked that. Right. Also, I think we could do with some advanced classes. Aside from the elemental monk, there are others that people are beginning to discover on their own, so having the classes available would serve as a good way to guide them down those paths. Well, raising the level limit was easy enough. I could do that anytime I wanted. I'd have to check which areas needed to be more developed before buying that stuff, though. Alright, anything else? Ryan nodded her head once again. I think it's about time we purchase the guild system. There are several organizations starting to appear, ranging from the temples, your Wraith group, or kingdom guards. That being the case, the world could definitely benefit from a unified guild system. I considered that for a moment, thinking back to what I had read about the guild system. It didn't seem to be too much of an issue to buy it, and it wasn't exactly expensive. Alright, anything else before I start buying things? I asked as I looked to Ryan. No, but there is something to tell you. Tubrok just finished up the last of the god weapon prototypes. He plans to make upgraded versions whenever I am able to enchant them better. Alright, then what fields do you think are the most lacking, so I know what to buy? I already knew Key was one, but I wanted to hear what else she had in mind. Well, they haven't really been doing much in the way of travel aside from their own 2 feet. They've started ship construction, and some races are already sailing a small distance from their continent. For mundane travel methods, we can teach them with Terra's help, though. Right now, we need Key and natural energy guides. The Druid and Shaman classes are even less developed than monks. That was true, I had barely seen anyone with those abilities in the few times I've descended. I knew that there had to be people training the classes, due to my keeper level in them, but they still fell a bit behind the others. Alright, I'll go ahead and get started on that. By the way, have you found anything else of interest lately? When I asked that, Ryan had a somewhat embarrassed smile. Well, I haven't been as focused on my research ever since Leoin was born. I guess I can get back to it now that she's up here with us, though. I'll go do that now. Let her know that she can come find me anytime she wants, okay? I gave a brief nod, before watching Ryan hop up and walk out of the room. First, I took care of the easy parts, buying the new classes and the guild system. For the classes, I started with the basic Energy Masters class package that I had seen previously for 100 points. While I was at it, I perused the list of advanced spirit classes, so that I could give them something new as well. It didn't take me long to find a suitable one. Spirit Shaper. A higher version of the Reaper and Spirit Hunter classes. A Spirit Shaper is capable of shaping the spiritual energies around them, drawing them in as if they were their own. 15 points. Reaper and Spirit Hunter required. After purchasing that one, I grabbed the guild system for another 75 points. To my surprise, this system had various options that could be set, such as requirements to form and enter a guild, how many guilds one could be a part of, or the defensive capabilities of a guild base. There weren't many systems that I had purchased so far with customization options, so I was quite happy to have these choices. For establishing a guild, let's set the requirement to be divine permission. People can pray for their guild to be accepted, and if it is something that at least one god approves of, they can have it. No limit for the amount of guilds someone can join. I definitely don't want the guild names to be displayed in any way for others to see. And for the base defenses, let's set them to minimal, leaving most of the work to the guild members themselves. This left the primary use of a guild being communication and production, as people within a guild base received a small boost to tasks they attempted. But that was fine with me. Next up, I began looking for the key and natural energy guides. Since Ryan didn't offer a suggestion which one to get, then either there was only one of each, or she wanted me to choose it myself. That, or she just forgot, which is entirely possible. For key, I bought the basic key path that I had noticed before for 75 points, as well as a Tier 1 key guide that cost 100 points. I was a bit surprised that it only cost half as much as the first tier magic guide, but considering that I had to buy the key path as well, that did make up for most of it. After all, there was probably only so much you could do with key before setting up a key path. Finally, I began looking for guides on natural energy. This one took quite a bit longer, because I had to skim past the guides concerning natural spirits. I had a feeling I'd be looking at them later, but right now it wasn't what I needed. Energy of the World Tier 1. This comprehensive guide instructs the user in various methods of manipulating natural energy, as well as the various effects that can be achieved through the usage of said energy. 200 points. I let out a small sigh as I purchased this guide as well. One by one, 3 spheres of blue light floated down to appear in front of me. With that taken care of, I wrote a message to Ryan saying that the information was ready. I didn't want to absorb them myself because that would definitely distract. Father, I am finished. Leo Win's voice spoke up from deep within me, almost like a phantom thought. It felt distinctly different compared to the mental communication I was used to, or even how it was when she prayed to me before. This felt like I had heard someone saying my name in a room I knew to be empty, only to find it was my imagination. Accurate, even, for the most part. Closing my eyes, I cast my perception into my spiritual realm, where Leo Win now resided. The gray, misty landscape that had existed when any other spirit had lived there was no more. Instead, a flat grassy plain spread out, with a star-filled sky above. This was the first step of her training, to reshape my spiritual realm into a form that could communicate her abilities. She herself likely didn't know what she was creating until it was already done. So, what were the results? I asked curiously. By now, she should at least have some idea what path she'd be taking in the Aki Seppo art. Seated on the grassy field, Leo Win jumped briefly when she heard my voice. If I am understanding this right, I should be a transformative array type. I don't know what different forms I can take yet since we haven't practiced, but I feel like it is related to that. As she spoke, she pointed up at the starry sky above. Looking over the sky again, I noticed that quite a few stars seemed to be missing. It looked as though someone had cut out all but the stars necessary to form constellations. I couldn't help but chuckle at that, shaking my head. You really are our little star. From what she had said, Leo Win should be quite a powerful spirit, which did not come as any real surprise. In this art, there were several classifications for the bonded spirits. An array type was one which had many varied abilities, though each ability was typically weaker than a focused one. A transformative type was one that allowed the shape of the spirit to be altered for different uses. Naturally, the two types complemented each other. While Leo Win sat there with a slightly red face, I comforted her softly. We'll test it out soon. Your mother told me to let you know that you can find her anytime you want. And as long as we are up here, you can roam around whenever you'd like. Hearing that made a small smile surface on her face, followed by a brief nod. Following that, I withdrew my perception from my spiritual realm, and focused on the map in front of me. First, I am finally going to see what has happened with the centaurs and halflings. No more distractions. It's been hundreds of years, so something has to have happened by now. Chapter 114. A Wide Wide World. Finn sat at the table of his parents' home, a young man of 15. Today would be the beginning of his Koran, the rite of passage undertaken by both the halflings and the centaurs for over 100 years. After the great beast was destroyed and its wall of fire purged, the two races had found their people on the outside still warring against each other. Having been forced to survive together for so long, those that had fought the great beast moved to unify their people. They had long since discovered that their races actually had many things in common, once they were able to understand one another. Both races shared a love for exploration, the centaurs having only been restricted to their grasslands due to a mistaken belief. More importantly, even their gods seemed to have similarities. Both the love domain of the halfling goddess, as well as the fellowship domain of the centaur's tribal shared a few characteristics. This was enough that it had been able to gradually quell the hatred each side felt for the other. Though, no centaur would ever doubt if something as small as a halfling could be dangerous again. Now, Finn prepared himself for his Koran. In truth, it was not a dangerous mission, not truly. Since the unification of the two races, halfling culture had changed a lot. Now, children were forbidden from roaming the world aimlessly, instead staying in a city with their families while they learned the knowledge they would need to survive on their own. The Koran was the final test. All of the children his age, regardless of gender or race, would set out from the city as a group. They would wander for 6 months before returning. But when they did return, it would not be as a child, but an adult. Sometimes, the groups would split up during the journey, but it was always suggested that they stick to a larger force as much as possible. Soon, his father appeared, walking through the open door to the room. In his hand was a large leather pack, big enough to fit a young halfling if he wanted. "You ready, Finn?" his father asked with a smile, to which the young boy nodded. After handing over the pack, the two of them walked together out of the house. Outside, his mother was already waiting for the two of them, and the three walked to the northern exit of town. Once there, they found dozens of other families, both halfling and centaur alike. Standing at the front was a lone centaur woman smiling at them all. "I think this should be everyone," she said as she mentally counted the crowd. "As you all know, the Koran is a sacred rite. Since the time of the great beast, the lord and lady of the land have offered us this test. Before our young are to become adults, we must send them out to experience the world. The good and the bad, the bounties and perils. But they must do so together, without the prejudices of the old to burden their young hearts. When you leave these walls, you will be but children. Children who must survive in a harsh world with the knowledge you have been given, and the friends by your side. In Tribal's name, I pray for the safety of you and your fellows. In Orivi's name, I bless your path. Many partnerships have been found during the Koran which last a lifetime. Cherish everyone with you, for you will all be relying on each other." After saying that, she took a deep breath, her face becoming more serious. "Some of you, however, will wish to venture alone. To explore the world with your wits and weapons, and nothing more. This is not against the will of the divines, so I shall bless your paths as well. Whether your hands be linked or bloodied, you will always have a home to return to. And when you do return in 6 months, it will no longer be as children. You will have earned the respect of an adult." Finally, she slowly trotted off to the side, her arm sweeping gently towards the land beyond the city's gates. "Now go, children of the city. May the Lord and Lady watch over you, as they have watched over all of us in our times of need." With the ceremonial speech finished, there was a brief moment of silence. The silence was broken when the first person, a young centaur boy, stepped forward. His face showed a mix of anxiety and excitement, but he was still moving forward. And with that as the signal, the others followed one by one, their families watching with wet eyes. There would always be those lost to the Koran, but for those who returned, they would have the strength and wisdom to decide their own fates. Blank, underscore, blank, underscore underscore. Well, I was not expecting that. I muttered slightly as I watched the end of the ceremony. I was happy that the two races had reconciled their differences, and seemed to be living in relative peace. But I hadn't really expected them to nearly give up their nomadic ways. That said though, I could still see a large number of both race wandering the lands. There were just far more of them in cities than I had anticipated. Also, it was hard to say that they had completely reconciled. I was still able to see a few cases where slavery had cropped up, although a brief investigation revealed the vast majority of such to be criminals serving their sentence. Very few cases could be seen where someone had been forced unjustly into such a position. I nodded my head, realizing that Tribal and Orivi had to have guided their two races quite a bit in order to get that kind of result. And this did give me hope for the eventual cooperation of their races, as well as others when they later met. After all, the conflict between those two had been extremely severe. If not for them taking this Koran completely unsupervised, it was entirely possible that racist tendencies would still leak through to the younger generation. This way, they faced life and death together, building a bond in the same way that they did when fighting the dragon. "So this is how you watch the world." I heard Leowin's voice speaking to me, reminding me that she was still within my spiritual realm. "It really is different, like Mom said. Once I get a bit more experienced, I might be able to look at it like how you imagined." I spoke out loud with a small smile. "Do you want to come out?" "Sure," came the happy response a moment later. With a thought, I once again brought her out to materialize in front of me. "If it's okay, could I look at one of those?" she asked almost immediately, a hand pointing towards the 3 blue information spheres I had recently purchased. I nodded my head. All right. These two are related to Ki, so you should be able to understand them better. I explained as I set aside two of them, taking the other one myself. I don't think you had any experience with natural energy, so this one wouldn't likely be of any use to you. She smiled happily as she looked at the two spheres. Choosing one at random, she picked up the sphere that gave information about key paths, closing her eyes to focus on it while I began absorbing information on natural energy. I could feel the knowledge rushing into my mind, stopping now and then to sort and process it, constantly amazing myself by the depths it reached. From the very first line, no basic energy stands above any other, I knew that there would be a lot to glean from this. And after I had gotten around halfway through, my focus, as well as Leowen's, was suddenly interrupted by the door slamming open. Dale. Dale. Judging by the excited tone, I already knew who it was. Glancing over, I saw Ryan grinning like a madwoman. It even took her a few moments to process that Leowen was standing right beside me, at which point her face softened quite a bit. Oh, hello Leowen. Is your training all right? Are you able to come out again now? She asked, a mix of nervousness and hope on her face. Leowen laughed lightly. It's fine, mother. You don't have to be so worried. I like it up here, really. But what has you so excited? I'm quite interested to know that myself. I chimed in, raising a hand. Oh, right. Udona came to show me something and I think you need to see it. Her face once again showed the zealous worship that let me know this was something related to a new form of magic. Well, we better get going then, Leowen. I said with a light chuckle. When Ryan gets like this, she won't be satisfied until she shows and explains everything she can. Though I said that, Leowen seemed almost as interested as Ryan herself, so the two of us quickly agreed to join her. No sooner had that agreement been expressed than the three of us had transported to Ryan's little testing area. Leowen let out a small yip of surprise at the sudden movement, but looked around in awe at the thousands of random spell diagrams that lined the floor. Udona sat in a chair nearby, her head slumped over as if half asleep. Her golden hair was in a mess, and bags were forming under her eyes. It was only when she heard Leowen that her head jerked up. Huh, oh, hey guys, I take it she told you. No, she did not. I denied, shaking my head. Could you? Okay. She nodded briefly. A kitsune just unlocked the elementalist class. Apparently, he's earned it for a while, so once you bought it he got it almost right away. Saying that much, she yawned heavily, bringing one hand up to cover her mouth. Looking at Ryan, her eyes seemed even more tired. Can I go back to my room now? My incarnation is writing a new song, and I really wanna focus on that. Show them first, then you can go. Ryan urged, waving her hands as if to get Udona to hurry it along. This is your discovery, so you get the limelight this time. Okay. She sighed gently, slowly standing up. Her pink slippers about fell off when she stumbled forward, and I had to wonder just how much of her focus she was splitting for her incarnation, or if she even had two of them going at once. At least, that's how Terra had been when she was doing so. Can you set up a couple of targets for me, then? As soon as she had asked, a line of wooden dummies appeared around 50 meters away, causing Leowen's eyes to widen slightly. However, Udona just shrugged her shoulders and turned towards them. Watch close. The first spell will be normal, the second will be as an elementalist. While she was speaking, I could see three glowing red diagrams appear in the air in front of her. At a glance, I could recognize them as the homing fireball spell Ryan had showed to me a while back. Unsurprisingly, what came out was a large fireball, which split apart and hit several of the targets, lighting them on fire. However, as if to not give us any time to react, the same spell diagrams appeared in front of her again. Udona's voice suddenly seemed to turn serious, echoing throughout the room. I could feel the natural energy stirring as she called out to it. As the one who commands the physical laws, come forth. The first of the three diagrams began emitting a red lightning that arced along it. Become a blade and pierce those who stand before me. This time, the second of the three circles lit up, before the third joined it with the final verse of her chant. Let walk the armies of flame, my soldiers of conflagration. With all three circles imbued with whatever power she was channeling, the spell activated. What had before started as a fireball now had a different shape. A tall figure, a man made of fire. In one hand it held a sword that seemed to extend half its length. Once the flame warrior had formed, it ran forward towards the targets. With every step, an afterimage appeared behind it, forming an identical soldier. Although the flames seemed to weaken each time, Their numbers more than made up for it. By the time the army of flame had reached the dummies, there were enough of them to make it seem as if a wall of fire had appeared. I couldn't even properly discern what they were doing until the spell ended, and they all vanished. At that time, I was able to see that over half of the wooden dummies had been sliced clean through, the rest having numerous stab marks on their bodies. Leowin and I were both watching in awe, our silence broken by a yawn coming off from the side. Okay, can I go back now? She asked, seeming like she might fall asleep on her feet. Sure, Ryan said with a nod. I'll have Tara send up some of those comics you like later. Thanks for helping us out with this. Her fox ears seemed to perk up slightly at the mention of the comics, before she vanished from the room. Afterwards, Ryan turned to face the two of us. So, questions? She asked with a wide grin. What, and how? I couldn't help but ask. The power of an elementalist, to combine natural energy with magical spells, enhancing their power. Whenever a druid casts their magic, they send out their mana to the surroundings to deliver a command. Udona did the same thing. She simply used her voice to give the command. You could probably do it without, but it'll be a bit easier to focus on the spell diagrams if you aren't also using mental communication. Ryan explained, briefly going off into a tangent before I snapped my fingers to get her attention. Anyways, by commanding the natural energy to merge with the spell, you can give it new effects. The most obvious is a boost in power, but other things can be done as well. Udona was able to shape a fireball into a walking figure because of how she wielded the natural energy. This should be able to supplement various missing effects within a spell diagram, and maybe even replace it altogether. Restrictions? I asked as I looked to her, wanting to get this over with. It was exciting, and I might even give it a try later, but I was more interested in getting back to learning more about natural energy. I haven't done any research yet to be sure, but I have some speculations. Most likely, you won't be able to change anything defined by the spell diagram. A fireball is a fireball because it is a shapeless ball of fire. Udona simply gave it shape. She wouldn't be able to make it into a ball of ice like that, or anything. Let me run some tests, and I should be able to tell me. She nodded her head, sinking into thought. Just as I was about to return us to my room, Leowin spoke up. Could I help? She asked, looking at Ryan. I wasn't ever able to help you with your experiments when we were alive, but how about now? Of course. Ryan blurted out automatically, and then immediately used a hand to cover her mouth. I mean, of course you can, Leowin. I just didn't want you to do any of that earlier because it'd mess up your strength ratio, and I didn't want to let you get hurt by that. You don't have to worry about that anymore, so I'd love to have you helping me. Leowin grinned suddenly, walking over towards Ryan, before turning around to glance at me. It won't be a problem if we're far apart, right? I don't know how far it is to the room. It shouldn't be, I said, waving it off. The energy here isn't limited like that, so you should be able to go wherever you want. All right. She gave a determined nod. I'll come back to the room to finish studying later. I nodded in return, smiling as I went back to the room. Looks like I have a few more things to think about. Chapter 115. Level Field. After returning to my room, I finished going over the details of natural energy, and then began looking at the information I had purchased for Key. Like with natural energy, there were so many things that I had not even considered as a possibility here. It felt like, if some of this was taught in the world below, mages might not be so dominant. That said, it took me quite a while before I was able to finish both knowledge orbs, at which point I moved on to the key path I bought. A brief examination of it was all I needed to see to know that the key path was set to mostly follow the skeleton of the creature practicing it. There were several key points to note, however. First of all, the key path had several spherical shapes placed throughout it, located at the heart and various joints. According to the explanation, this was used to pool energy and make it more easily accessible while also strengthening the joints. This was a clever little aspect that would make it easier to use certain techniques. Speaking of which, the second thing I noticed was the presence of several output veins in the key path. Thin lines leading to the surface of the skin in places like the fingers, feet, or at intermittent points along the body. This was so that Ki could be used to reinforce the skin, or called to exit the body through various means. With that taken care of, I set aside the 3 information spheres so that any of the other gods or goddesses could look through them. I was debating establishing my second world, but there was something else that I wanted to do first. A little test, just to confirm how accurate the information I purchased was. First, I sent a message to Leowin through my spiritual realm, letting her know that I needed her to return for a little while because I was going to descend to the world for some quick training. I had given her a few hours to try out things with her mother, so I figured a brief break wouldn't be too bad for her. She seemed to disagree, however, and was reluctant to return. Though, it seemed that Ryan said something to her, because she did come back fairly quickly, returning to my spiritual realm to focus on her own training. Navigating through the window, I prepared to descend once again, this time heading down as a human on a small island in the middle of nowhere. To my surprise, there was a new entry in the menu, allowing me to assign a key path to the body I was preparing. When I selected it, I found that only the path I had purchased was available. Probably a system to make it easier for keepers to use what they have paid for. Nonetheless, the familiar window appeared as I descended, and I once again found myself briefly shrouded in blue light. When it faded away, I now stood on a small island, not a soul in sight around me. And by small, I could probably trip and fall into the ocean in any direction. Naturally, this meant that there was a considerable amount of underwater wildlife nearby, but it was not such an abrupt drop that anything too big could sneak up on me. This was just what I needed in order to practice. A quiet, secluded space where activating my abilities would not signal the creation of a new holy city or something. First, I closed my eyes, focusing inward to inspect my ki. The sensation was hard to notice at first, until I went looking for it, but my ki was flowing in a much more controlled manner now. At the same time, I felt that the strength of my body had increased by a large margin compared to before. This purchase at least was definitely worth the points. The next thing I wanted to do was the one that was actually important. I wanted to create a token of nature, something that would help me control natural energy more smoothly. Tara once explained that I could use mana to command natural energy, which is not at all wrong. That is the suggested method for beginners. However, once someone has enough control over their own energy, they must create a token. This token can only be used to its full power by its creator, but allows them to communicate with natural energy without the need for mana. Essentially, this made druids and shamans have unlimited spellcasting ability, since they were not drawing on any of their own energies. The downside to this was the natural energy was the thinnest of the four main energy types, and thus the most easy to overcome in a head-on clash. A fireball spell would always be harder to dispel than a fireball made from natural energy, for example. Raising up one of my hands, I released my keeper abilities, making sure that I would have enough mana to control the energy long enough to create my token. Gather. I spoke, watching as the water around me seemed to tremble under my voice. Condense. Follow my will. Purify and solidify. Multicolored lights started to slowly gather. Some came from the water, some came from the ground beneath my feet, and some came from the air above me. They all moved together at a single location, my upheld hand. Become the mark of recognition, the token of authority. The lights began swirling around my wrist, following the delicate control I exerted over them. Let my will be the will of the world. With that, the energies condensed one last time, forming a golden band around my wrist. Even without trying, I could sense its presence. The token of nature was designed by its creator, so there was no simple default shape. The reason I chose a golden band was because I felt it to be the most practical, no matter where or when I may need it. Letting out a sigh, I pulled my hand down, at the same time sealing my keeper abilities again. When I closed my eyes, I could vividly see the world around me, all of its life and energy. I could see the currents of the wind and the water, and everything living within it. This will definitely come in handy in the future. Druid class unlocked. Druid has leveled up. Druid has leveled up. Druid has leveled up. Druid has leveled up. Ellipsis. Shaman class unlocked. Shaman has leveled up. Shaman has leveled up. Shaman has leveled up. Ellipsis. I watched as both the Druid and Shaman classes immediately reached level 10 after I formed the token of nature. I was somewhat annoyed that my martial artist class hadn't experienced a similar growth surge, but it was likely due to my lack of training in the art. Part of me wondered if it would shoot up again after Leowin and I tried out our Aki Seppo abilities. Out of curiosity, I opened up my status window to check on my current stats after the 20 level increase. Name: Dale Mitchell. Race: Human Keeper. Health: 280 280ths, 121,555 121,555ths. Mana: 235 235ths, 37,146 37,146ths. Strength: 7 251. Ki: 491 491sts, 49,276 49,276. Stamina, 10 219. Intelligence, 12 176. Dexterity, 13 245. Wisdom, 23 306. Luck, 6 76. Charm, 5 75. Class list. Alchemist 1 51. Archer 0 88. Architect 0 52. Archmage 0 25. Armorer 0 52. Artisan 0 31. Assassin 0 41. Bard 0 77. Berserker 0 51. Blacksmith 0 82. Carpenter 1 65. Chef 0 71. Cleric 0 36. Druid 10 72. Enchanter 5 69. Engineer 0 4. Farmer 0 44. Gambler 0 7. Guard 0 63. Herbalist 2 53. Hero 3 38. Hunter 0 83. Jeweler 0 27. Knight 0 61. Leader 1 43. Leatherworker 0 64. Mage 2 80. Martial Artist 1 76. Merchant 0 34. Miner 0 68. Monk 8 64. Monster Tamer 2 56. Ninja 6 67. Noble 0 22. Painter 0 33. Paladin 0 2. Pirate 0 17. Priest 1 54. Scholar 1 35. Scout 1 65. Sculptor 0 31. Shaman 10 44. Spirit Hunter 15 42. Spirit Tamer 6 60. Swordsman 0 37. Tailor 0 32. Templar 0 16. Warrior 2 67. Advanced class list. Elementalist 0 3. Elemental Monk 0 2. All in all, my keeper stats seem to have gone down slightly since the last time I checked. Most likely due to certain goddesses who trained one class exclusively losing their incarnations. That, or it was just a coincidental result of the passing of time and death of geniuses in certain fields. Either way, it wasn't enough to hinder me, should I need to use those abilities at any time. My personal stats on the other hand seemed to have increased in almost every field, which I personally welcomed. A sudden 20 level jump was bound to give me some bonuses, after all. I was tempted to quickly raise some of my other classes, now that I had the most thorough training I could ever ask for with ki and natural energy. If my conjecture was right, each class had its own standard for when you qualified to level up. For most, it was based on abilities you displayed, or experience you garner while using the abilities of a class. If I'm right, the minimum level to create a token should be 10 for both Shaman and Druid, which is why it raised me that much when I did so. Other classes should have different requirements. For instance, I've only gained Scout by traveling to new places manually, so it should be a purely exploration class. Similarly, I only gained Scholar by learning new facts within this world and not displaying what I already knew. As such, Scholar should only register what I learn within the world. Leowin, you up for a little bit of an adventure? I asked, knowing that my words would likely get her attention. Of course, father. What did you have in mind? She responded, though I could detect a slightly amused tone within her voice. Have you ever wanted to walk on water? I grinned, looking out to the ocean. This was something that I had foolishly tried back when I was first practicing chakra, but now I actually knew the method to do it. Not particularly. Though, I admit that it sounds interesting. Good enough for me. I pointed myself in the direction where I knew there would be another island. First things first, I said as I crouched down, dipping my hand inside the water and focusing. I could feel the natural energy within the water shift under my attention, and nodded slightly before standing up to wave my hand dry. What was that for? Leowin asked curiously. You'll see in a bit. I chuckled, before suddenly jumping off the small island and towards the water. I could almost feel Leowin's panic as she saw various large aquatic animals beneath the surface ahead of us. As soon as my feet touched the water, I focused my ki through my feet and into the water itself. This was a process that I learned recently, which enabled someone to use their ki to increase the density of whatever is below their foot briefly. Had I enough control and ki, I could do this with a casual walk. Alas, I didn't have such luxuries with my normal abilities, so I could only resort to condensing the water just long enough for me to jump off of it for my next step. Each jump seemed to cause ripples within the water, and consumed a small portion of ki at the same time. Leowin's panic was quickly turning into excitement as I ran across the water as easily as if it were dry land. But, father, how are you going to stop? She asked, her excitement starting to die down as she realized just how fast we were moving. It did not take a modern scientist to realize that fast objects don't normally slow down easily. That's going to be a bit tricky, I admitted playfully as I saw the island I was aiming at. It was just coming up past the horizon, rapidly moving closer as each step carried us dozens of meters. In truth, stopping would not be a problem, I just wanted to have a bit of fun with her. Sure enough, her worry intensified, growing stronger and stronger as we approached an island no bigger than the one we had left. The fact that I showed no signs of slowing down the entire time likely didn't help. It wasn't until we were right at the island that I acted. Shoving both hands in front of me, I spread my ki out in the same way as I did with the water. This time, what I was condensing was the air itself, temporarily making it act as a wall to cushion me and stop my momentum. Of course, this was my first time doing this, so my calculations may have been a bit off. I only overshot it by a little bit, and got my knees a little wet. Once I had stopped upon the second island, I grinned as several notifications came in, signaling a 7-level increase for the monk class. Good, that part was pretty easy. Now, let's head back. Reaching down into the water, I let my hand soak once again while I allowed my mind to focus on the natural energy within. This was the real reason I had decided to move from one island to another, though the monk levels were definitely a nice touch. I was practicing another ability involving natural energy. When I pulled my hand out of the water, I ignored Leowin's confused emotions and brought my hand up. Almost immediately, the water reacted, forming into an oval portal in front of me. On the other side, I could see the same island that I had originally landed on, and so I simply stepped through. One final level of Druid was my reward for creating the portal. What? But, how? Why? What just happened? Leowin asked as she saw what I had done. In response, I could only chuckle while I began manipulating the menu to will myself back to the admin room. You really should have finished studying, I said in a teasing tone.